My daughter called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Just 5 words. "Dad, please come get me." Then the line went dead. When I pulled up to her in-law's place, her mother-in-law planted herself in the doorway and curled her lip. She is not leaving. No argument from me. No pleading either. I turned around, climbed back into my truck, and drove it straight through their $25,000 iron gate until the thing wrenched clean off its hinges. What I found inside stopped my heart. My daughter sprawled unconscious on the bathroom floor, needle marks up and down her arms. My blood didn't boil over. It went cold, stone cold. Right then, something locked into place inside me. This wasn't just a rescue. I was going to acquire every last piece of what they'd built and reduce it to ash. The name is Reginald Dupree, 68 years old. Welcome back to Calm Family Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If these stories of family loyalty and hard-won justice stay with you the way they stay with me, I'd be grateful if you hit that subscribe button and gave this one a like. Now, before we go any further, have you ever had to fight to protect someone you love from people who had more power than you? I want to hear from you in the comments. A quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. To my neighbors, I'm just a retired contractor who tools around in a 12-year-old pickup truck and spends more time than he should on his lawn. They see an old black man who keeps to himself. They don't know about the shell companies. They don't know about the logistics empire I built from a single flatbed truck. And they sure as hell don't know I could buy out their entire subdivision with what I keep locked in my floor safe. I kept things quiet because I wanted my daughter Nadine to find a man who loved her, for who she was not for her father's money. I thought she'd found that in Garrett Wyndham. I was wrong. The red numbers on my bedside clock read 3:03 a.m. when the phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It hit me like an alarm going off inside my chest. I fumbled for the receiver, my heart already pounding a warning I couldn't ignore. Dad. Her voice was a hollow shell of the bright, fierce girl I'd raised. Thick, slurred, terrified. "Dad, please come get me. They won't let me." Then a sound cut through the sharp, unmistakable crack of a phone being knocked from someone's hand. A man's voice underneath, muffled but full of anger. Then nothing. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask what had happened. I was already on my feet, yanking my pants over my pajamas. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a fury I hadn't felt since my construction days back in the 80s. I pulled up the GPS tracker I'd put on her phone years ago. A precaution she'd always laughed off, calling me paranoid. Now that blue dot blinking at the Wyndham estate was the only anchor keeping me from losing my mind entirely. I grabbed my keys. I walked past the gun safe. I paused maybe half a second. No, not tonight. If I brought a weapon, I'd use it, and then I'd be no use to Nadine from inside a prison cell. I needed my hands. My hands would be enough. The drive to the Wyndham estate is normally 40 minutes. I covered it in 20. My old Chevy Silverado shuddered as I pushed it past 85 miles per hour on the empty highway. The streetlights smeared into long white streaks. I had the wheel in a death grip, the leather groaning under my fingers. I kept thinking about the bruises I'd noticed on Nadine's arm last Thanksgiving. She'd told me she caught herself on a doorframe. I'd let myself believe it because I wanted to honor her marriage. I wanted to believe the prestigious, wealthy Wyndhams were decent people. That was my first mistake. I swung off the main road onto the private lane feeding into their neighborhood. Driveways out there are longer than most streets where I live. Trimmed hedges, security cameras, everywhere, no sound. A fortress designed to keep people like me at a distance. I rolled up to the front gate of the Wyndham mansion. It was a massive structure of wrought iron and stone built to make you feel small. Floodlights blasted the driveway the moment I hit the brakes. I was out of the truck before the engine fully settled. "Open the gate!" I roared. My voice punched through the nighttime silence and came back to me empty. The intercom buzzed. No one answered. Then the mansion's front door swung open, and Claudette Wyndham appeared on the porch. She had on a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck, a glass of bourbon in her hand, looking down at me from her stone steps the way she looks at staff who've left a smudge on the silver. "Shh, go home, Reginald," she called out, measured, dripping with contempt. "You are making a scene." "I need to see Nadine," I shouted, wrapping my hands around the iron bars. "She called me. She is in trouble." Claudette brought the glass slowly to her lips and took a sip. Then she laughed, dry, hollow, dismissive. "Nadine is having another one of her episodes. She is hysterical. Garrett is trying to calm her down. She is sleeping now. Open this gate, Claudette. That is your last warning." She descended the steps at a leisurely pace and stopped on the far side of the iron bars. Her eyes moved over my worn work boots, my flannel shirt, my gray hair. She didn't see a threat. She saw an inconvenience. "You people always get so emotional," she said, giving her glass a slow swirl. "Let me be very clear. Nadine is not going anywhere. She is unwell. We are handling it. Now remove yourself from my property before I call the police and tell them there's a man trying to force his way in. I'm sure they'll find it very interesting, a man of your description out here at this hour." She turned her back, dismissed me, figured the gate was all she needed, figured her last name was all she needed. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. A cold, crystalline calm settled over me. I walked back to my truck. I got in. I buckled my seatbelt. I put her in reverse and rolled back until my rear bumper nearly kissed the hedges across the way. Claudette stopped on the steps. She turned, frowning. "What are you doing?" I dropped her into drive. I buried the accelerator. The engine bellowed. The tires screamed against the pavement, clawing for grip, finding it. I watched Claudette's eyes blow wide open. She let go of her glass. It exploded on the driveway, but the sound vanished in the collision. My truck hit the center of that iron gate at 50 miles per hour. Metal shrieked, stone fractured, the lock snapped like dry kindling. One side of the gate tore completely free of its hinges and went skidding and clattering across the paved drive. My airbag didn't deploy, thank God, but my head whipped back hard. I didn't register the pain. Adrenaline handles that. I drove straight up to the front steps, grinding the broken glass into the driveway beneath my tires. Steam hissed from the radiator. I shouldered the door open and stepped out. Claudette was screaming now, backing away, every trace of composure gone. "You animal, you are going to jail." I walked right past her. She made a grab for my arm. I brushed her off without breaking stride. I kicked the front door in. It was already unlocked. The house smelled like lavender and old money. Marble foyer. A man in a dark suit materialized from the hallway, private security, big and young, the kind of build you get from a serious gym. "Sir, you need to stop right there." He ordered, his hand dropping to his belt. I didn't stop. I kept walking. He moved to cut me off, launching a heavy right hook. I slipped it. 40 years of hauling lumber and pouring concrete don't give you technique. They give you leverage. I drove my shoulder into his gut and took the air clean out of him. As he folded forward, I brought my knee up into his nose. A sharp crunch. He hit the floor and didn't get up. "Nadine," I shouted. I took the grand staircase at a run. First bedroom empty, second empty. Then I heard a toilet flush from the master suite. I hit the double doors hard. Garrett was standing beside the bed, buttoning his shirt. He looked up, face gone, pale eyes stretched wide. "Where is she?" I growled. "Reginald, wait," he said, hands up, stammering. "She just passed out. She took too many pills." I was trying to help her. Liar. I pushed past him into the bathroom. My heart stopped cold. Nadine was on the tile floor, curled up tight in one of Garrett's t-shirts. Her skin was the color of ash. Her breathing came in shallow, jagged pulls like something rattling loose inside her chest. "Nadine, baby daddy's here." I dropped to my knees and lifted her head. Her eyes had rolled back. I checked her arms. That's when I saw them. Fresh puncture marks, and bruises the shape of fingerprints where someone had pinned her down. My vision went red at the edges. This wasn't an overdose. This was an injection. I gathered her up against my chest. She was so light. Too light. She'd wasted away since Christmas. I stood with my daughter in my arms and turned to face Garrett. He'd backed himself into the corner, shaking. "What did you give her?" My voice had gone very quiet. Dangerously quiet. "Nothing. She's an addict, Reginald. You know how she is." I moved toward him. He flinched back, but I didn't hit him. Not yet. I had precious cargo. "If she dies," I whispered, "there is no place on this earth you can hide from me." I carried her out of the room, down the staircase, past the security guard still groaning on the floor, and out through the front door. Claudette was standing beside my truck phone pressed to her ear. She looked at me, at Nadine's limp body draped in my arms, and her face showed not one flicker of concern. Only irritation. "The police are 2 minutes away, Reginald," she hissed. "Till you have destroyed my gate. You have assaulted my staff. You are never going to see the light of day again." I eased Nadine into the passenger seat and buckled her in. I pressed 2 fingers to her wrist one more time. Faint, but there. I walked around to the driver's side. I stopped and held Claudette's gaze. "You think you're untouchable," I said. "You think because you live behind a gate and I drive a truck that gives you the power." I pulled the door open. Down the drive, sirens were already wailing, getting closer, slicing through the silence of the wealthy night. Blue and red strobed against the tree line. I climbed in and turned the key. The radiator was steaming. The front bumper was folded into the grill, but she started. "You have no idea what you just started," Claudette screamed over the sirens. I looked back at her through the shattered window. "No," I said. "You have no idea who you just stole from." I dropped into reverse and backed away from the wreckage of their perfect life, knowing the police weren't coming to help me. They were coming for me, and I was ready. Because for the first time in 30 years, Reginald Dupree was heading to war. As the first cruiser screeched in and blocked the driveway, I had one thought cut through everything else before this night is over. Everyone is going to know the truth. But first I had to survive the next 10 minutes. Officers poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn. They didn't see a father pulling his daughter from danger. They saw a black man in a beat-up truck on the grounds of a wealthy estate. "Get out of the vehicle. Put your hands where I can see them." I glanced at Nadine. She let out a soft moan. "Hold on, baby," I whispered. I shut off the engine. I put both hands out the window, but I kept my eyes fixed on Claudette Wyndham standing there with a victorious look spreading across her face. She believed this was the end of it. She believed she had won. She was wrong. This was just the opening move. And I had resources she couldn't dream of waiting on my call. When the officers grabbed me and pressed me down against the hood of my still-hot truck, I didn't feel fear. I felt focus. I knew exactly who to call. I knew exactly which lever to pull. The cuffs snapped tight around my wrists. The metal was cold and bit into my skin. "You are under arrest for home invasion, assault, and destruction of property," an officer barked close to my ear. I didn't resist. I let them push me into the back of the cruiser. Through the wire mesh, I watched paramedics make their way to my truck to check on Nadine. Claudette moved toward the sergeant, finger pointing at me, talking fast, spinning her version of events. I leaned back against the hard plastic and shut my eyes. All right, I thought. You want to play the game of power. You want to play who do you know? I breathed in, slow and deep. Let's play. The back of that cruiser smelled of stale vomit and hard plastic. My wrists ached against the cuffs, but I sat straight. I refused to slump. I refused to look like the criminal they'd already made up their minds about. Through the mesh, I watched the paramedics lift Nadine onto a stretcher. She looked so small up there. A sweep of red and blue light caught her face, and for one terrible second, I thought she was gone. My chest seized until I saw the rise and fall of her breathing. She was alive. That was what mattered. The drive to the precinct was quick and quiet. Neither officer in the front spoke to me. Neither asked for my account of what happened. The story had written itself the instant they'd rolled up to the Wyndham Estate wealthy family-gated community, a black man in a work truck who'd plowed through their property. It made no difference that I'd built half the schools in this county. It made no difference that my tax returns had more zeros than their badge numbers. In that car, I was nothing but a violent intruder. When we reached the station, they hauled me out with more force than necessary. One officer, young buzzcut, clamped my arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Watch your head," he said, jamming me down into the booking room chair. He wasn't being helpful. He was reminding me of the pecking order. I didn't resist. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I gave them my name. I gave them my address. When they asked for my occupation, I said retired. The sergeant behind the desk made a short, contemptuous sound. Retired from what, breaking and entering? I met his eyes. This was a man who had probably felt small his whole life, and now a badge and a gun gave him the chance to feel large. Retired from building the precinct you're sitting in," I said, without raising my voice. He stopped typing. He actually looked at me, really looked for the first time. Then the sneer came back, and he turned to his screen. "Put him in holding." They took my belt. They took my shoelaces. They stripped my dignity one item at a time and sealed it all in a plastic bag. Then they walked me into a cell that smelled of urine and despair. The heavy steel door crashed shut, and the sound landed somewhere deep in my gut. I settled onto the cold concrete bench. The cell was empty except for a drunk passed out in the corner. I rested my head against the cinder block wall and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was draining out of me, leaving behind a cold, aching clarity. My mind traveled back 3 years to the day Nadine told me she was marrying Garrett. We were on my back porch with iced tea. She was radiant. "Dad, he's different," she'd said. "He comes from a good family. They are important people." I had tried to warn her. I told her that important people often believe they're exempt from the rules everyone else lives by. I told her that money doesn't make a man good. It just makes him loud. But she was in love. She saw a prince. I saw a man who never quite met my eye when he shook my hand. A man who made little digs about my truck, about my neighborhood, always wrapped in a grin but sharp underneath. I remembered last Thanksgiving. Garrett had snapped at Nadine for getting gravy on the tablecloth, a small thing. A flare of temper that vanished almost as fast as it appeared. But I caught the way Nadine flinched. I saw her drop her eyes and murmur an apology to a man who should have been laughing it off. I should have stepped in right then. I should have overturned the table and had it out with him in the yard. But I didn't. I respected her choices. I respected her marriage. I was a fool. A father's job isn't to respect a marriage that is destroying his child. A father's job is to protect her, even from herself. I had let her down. I had watched my daughter walk into a house of wolves because I was too afraid of looking like the angry, overprotective father. I sat in that cell and let the guilt come down on me. It was heavier than the walls. Hours went by. The drunk in the corner woke up, got sick, and fell back asleep. Pale morning light crept in through the barred window near the ceiling. I waited for the arraignment. I waited for the chance to post bail. I had the cash. I could have bought my freedom 10 times over. But no one came. Around noon, the door buzzed. A guard called my name. Dupree, lawyer? They walked me to a small consultation room. Darnell Royce was waiting. Darnell has been my attorney for 20 years. He is the only person alive besides me who knows the true reach of my assets. He was on his feet when I walked in. His expression the controlled professional version of barely contained fury. No handshake. He pointed at the chair across from him. Sit down, Reginald. I sat. What about bail, I asked. What? There is no bail. Darnell said, his voice tight. The judge denied it. Denied it on what grounds I have no record. I own property. On the grounds that Roland Wyndham played golf with the judge last Sunday, Darnell said, snapping open his briefcase. They are charging you with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They are claiming the truck was the weapon. They say you tried to run Claudette over. Roland is pushing for attempted murder. I laughed. It came out dry and hard. Of course he was. Bury me under legal fees and prison time so I couldn't go looking for Nadine. Where is she? I asked. She's in a private facility, Darnell said. Cedar Ridge Behavioral Health, a high-security rehab center up in the mountains. Roland got an emergency medical guardianship order signed that same morning. He claimed Nadine was a danger to herself and to others because of drug-induced psychosis. They have her on a 72-hour hold, Reginald. No visitors, no phone calls. My hands knotted into fists on the metal table. They locked her away. They drugged her, beat her, and now they sealed her off to bury the evidence. This isn't a legal battle, Darnell, I said quietly. This is a siege. Roland thinks he's already won, Darnell said. He figures you're just a blue-collar guy with a bad temper. He has no idea about the holdings. He has no idea about the liquid capital. He's going to find out, I said. I leaned forward. Darnell, do you have the red binder? Darnell nodded. He knew exactly what I was asking. The red binder held the protocols for the Black Fund. A war chest I'd begun building the day Nadine was born. Money that didn't appear on any public record. Money capable of moving mountains or leveling them. Activate it, I said. Darnell hesitated. Reginald, if we go down this road, we are declaring total war. We'll be burning through cash at a rate that would give a bank cold sweats. We are talking hostile takeovers. We are talking about buying debt. I don't care. I cut him off. I want you to buy everything. Find out who holds the mortgage on the Wyndham estate. Buy it. Find out who holds the notes on Garrett's car, on Claudette's credit cards, on Roland's country club membership. Buy it all. I looked Darnell in the eye. They took my daughter. They took my freedom. I am going to take their world. I want to own the air they breathe. By the time I walk out of this cell, I want to be their landlord, their banker, and their worst nightmare. Darnell closed his briefcase. The snap of the latch rang like a gunshot. I'll make the calls, he said. He stood and knocked for the guard. At the door, he paused and looked back at me. Roland Wyndham spent 40 years building a reputation, Darnell said. It's going to take us about 40 minutes to buy it. I settled back in my chair. For the first time since that phone rang at 3 a.m., something like calm moved through me. The calm of a man who knows he holds the biggest gun in the room and has just flicked off the safety. They wanted to use the system against me. They wanted their power to grind the little guy into dust. They were about to discover the little guy owned the bank that built their pedestal. "Get me out of here, Darnell," I said. "I have a daughter to save." The sunlight outside the precinct hit like a slap. It felt like an insult. I walked out through those heavy steel doors, shoelaces back in my boots, wallet back in my pocket, and still I didn't feel free. Darnell was standing by his dark gray sedan. No smile. He held out a sheet of paper, a temporary restraining order. Roland Wyndham had not been idle while I sat in that cell. The order was sweeping. I was to stay 500 yards away from Nadine Dupree Garrett Wyndham and their residence. No contact by phone, email, or through any third party. Violate it, and I'd go straight back to lockup, no bail this time. I crushed the paper in my fist. They were using the law as a shield to conceal their crime. "Where is she, Darnell?" I asked. "Due Cedar Ridge," he said. "But Reginald, you cannot go there. The order covers her location. If you set foot on that property, Roland will have you in cuffs before you reach the front desk." I got into my truck. The front bumper was still crumpled, a mangled scar from the night before. I drove, but not to Cedar Ridge Behavioral Health. Darnell was right. Going there now meant playing their game by their rules. I needed to change the game entirely. I drove to a small, unremarkable office building in the industrial district. This was where I kept my other insurance policy. His name was Orion. He was a private investigator, former forensic accountant for the state. He didn't concern himself much with the law. He concerned himself with the truth as long as the check cleared. I walked into his office. Orion was behind a desk, buried under files, eyes tired but razor sharp. "Heard you had quite a night, Reginald," he said. I sat down. "Tell me you found something, Orion. Tell me why they're holding my daughter." Orion slid a manila folder across the desk. I opened it. First page, a medical intake form from Cedar Ridge Behavioral Health dated that morning. Diagnosis: severe opioid use disorder, acute psychosis. My hands weren't steady. I kept reading. The report claimed Nadine had been using heroin for 2 years. It claimed she had a history of self-harm. It described her as delusional and violent. "It's a lie," I said, voice low. "Nadine is terrified of needles. She passes out getting a flu shot. She has 1 glass of bourbon at Christmas. She is not a junkie." "Look at the signature," Orion said. I looked. Dr. Alistair Greer. The name meant nothing to me. "Dr. Greer is on the Wyndham payroll," Orion explained. "Concierge doctor for the wealthy. He signs whatever they pay him to sign. But look at the toxicology report attached to the back. That's the real one. I have a source inside the lab." I turned the page. The official report said heroin. The actual lab results, the ones Orion had intercepted, told an entirely different story. No opioids in her system. None whatsoever. But there were massive levels of olanzapine and lorazepam. I looked up at him. "Tranquilizers," Orion said. "Antipsychotics and sedatives. They are not treating an addiction, Reginald. They are chemically lobotomizing her. They are keeping her sedated so she cannot speak. They are holding her in a twilight state so she cannot tell anyone what happened that night." A cold rage settled deep in my gut, heavier than the fury from the night before. This wasn't heat. This was ice. They were erasing my daughter, turning her into a shell to cover their tracks. Like when I asked, why go to this length? Why not just divorce her? Why destroy her? Orion reached for a second folder. Thicker. Because of this, he said, and opened it. It was a financial autopsy of Garrett Wyndham. On the surface, Garrett was a prosperous investment banker, $5,000 suits, a Maserati in the drive, a mansion in Ridgemore. But the documents in front of me showed the rot underneath the veneer. Nah, Garrett is broke. Orion said, no softening. Not just broke. He's underwater. He's been leveraging his assets for 5 years to cover bad trades. He dropped $2 million on crypto. Another $3 million on a tech startup that cratered. I turned through the bank statements. Red ink on every page. Overdraft fees. But that's not the worst of it. Orion went on. He drained the trust fund. I stopped. The air left my lungs. When my wife died, she left a trust for Nadine. Substantial enough that Nadine would never need to work a day in her life if she chose not to. It was meant to be untouchable. It's gone, Reginald. Every dollar of it. Garrett forged her signature on withdrawal requests for the past 18 months. He emptied it to cover margin calls. The nausea hit me like a wave. My wife's legacy. The security I had carefully built for my daughter. Taken by a man who smiled across my dinner table. But even that wasn't enough, Orion said. He tapped a document at the bottom of the stack. A loan agreement not from any bank. It was a promissory note from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He borrowed $5 million from the cartel, Orion said. Or at least people who lend money on the same terms as the cartel. High interest, short window, and brutal penalties for default. I checked the date on the note. The loan was due in 2 weeks. He doesn't have the money, I said. No. Orion agreed. He has nothing. His parents, Roland and Claudette, are asset-rich, but cash-poor. Their wealth is locked in trusts and properties they can't move quickly without drawing attention. So why hold on to Nadine? I asked. If there's no money left, why keep her? Orion pulled out a map, a survey of the downtown district. He drew a circle around a large parcel near the waterfront. Because of this, he said. The old lumberyard. I knew it well. I'd bought that land 30 years ago when it was nothing but worthless industrial waste. Cleaned it up myself. Put the deed in Nadine's name as a wedding gift. Told her to hold on to it. Told her it was her safety net. Developers had just cleared approval for a new stadium 3 blocks away. Orion told me that land is now worth $10 million. Garrett knows it. He already has a buyer lined up. A cash buyer. I got to my feet. The chair scraped hard against the floor. He needs her to sell it. I said it out loud. Orion corrected me, he needs her signature. But Nadine refused. He'd found emails on Garrett's server. Garrett had been pressuring her to sell for months. She said no. She told him it was her father's gift. So he needs her incapacitated, I said, finishing the thought. Exactly. If Nadine is ruled mentally incompetent, if she is committed to a long-term facility for severe drug addiction and psychosis control of her assets transfers to her spouse. Garrett gets power of attorney. He signs the deed. He moves the land. He pays off the mob and keeps what's left. It was a slave contract. They weren't just silencing her. They were enslaving her. Stripping away her mind, her voice, and her property to settle his debts. They were going to keep her buried in a chemical fog for the rest of her life, or until she conveniently overdosed, just so Garrett could go on playing the wealthy man. I looked at the photos of my daughter in the medical file. She looked pale and hollow, broken. They think she's just a resource, I said. They think she's a piggy bank they can smash open. They don't know who they're dealing with, Orion said. They think you're just a dad with a truck. I closed the folder. I picked up the toxicology report. I'm not just a dad, I said. I'm the man who is going to repossess their lives. I took out my checkbook and wrote Orion a check for $50,000. Keep digging, I said. I want names. I want to know who holds Garrett's gambling debts. I want to know who the mobsters are. I want to know where Roland hides his money. I want to know everything. I walked out of the office. The sun was going down. The sky had gone deep red. It was fitting. I sat in my truck and called Darnell. Darnell, I said, I know what they're doing. It's the land, the lumber yard. I'll put a lice pendants on that property right now, Darnell said. I'll tie it up in litigation so tight a mosquito couldn't get through. They won't be able to move an inch of it. Do it, I said. And Darnell, yes, Reginald. Find out who holds the debt on the Wyndham Mansion. Now, already did, Darnell replied. It's a private equity firm out of Boston. Buy it, I said. Reginald, that is going to cost. I don't care what it costs. Buy the note. I want to be the one who holds the deed to their house. I want to be the one who decides whether they have a roof over their heads tonight. Consider it done. I hung up. I looked at the restraining order sitting on the passenger seat. It said I couldn't go near them. It said I couldn't touch them. But it didn't say I couldn't own them. They wanted to trap my daughter in a cage of lies and drugs. I was going to construct a cage of debt and legal ruin around them and weld the door shut from the outside. I started the engine. I wasn't going home. I had work to do. I drove toward the city, toward the lights, toward the war. The Wyndhams wanted to treat people like property. Fine. I was about to show them what happens when the property fights back. I was about to make it clear that you cannot build a dynasty on the back of a Dupree. Tonight, I would not sleep. Tonight, I would become the monster they accused me of being. But I would be a monster with a checkbook, and that is the most dangerous kind there is. I drove to St. Crispin's Academy with one purpose. My daughter was locked in a medicated haze, and my son-in-law was drowning in debt deep enough that he was willing to sell her soul to climb out. That left my grandson Eli was 5 years old. An innocent pawn on a chessboard he had no understanding of. I knew the Wyndhams. I knew how they operated. If they couldn't break Nadine, they would use Eli as leverage. They'd hold him hostage until she put her name on whatever documents they slid in front of her. I had to get him out. I had to get him somewhere safe before they could poison his mind against his mother. The school was a fortress of brick and ivy, tucked into the same zip code as the Wyndham estate. The kind of place that charges $40,000 a year for kindergarten. I pulled my battered truck up to the curb, ignoring the looks from the soccer moms in their Range Rovers. I went straight to the front office. The air conditioning was Arctic. The receptionist, a woman with reading glasses hanging from a pearl chain, looked up at me, no smile. I am here to pick up Eli Worthington, I said. I am his grandfather, Reginald Dupree. She stiffened. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. One moment, Mr. Dupree. She picked up the phone and murmured something into it without looking at me. She looked at the door behind her instead. A moment later, it opened. A man in a tweed suit came through, Principal Blackwood. I knew him or knew of him. He played golf with Roland Wyndham every Sunday. He was part of the club. Mr. Dupree. Blackwood said, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and completely without warmth. You need to leave the premises immediately. I am on the authorized pickup list, I said, keeping my tone level. Nadine added me 3 years ago. Blackwood sighed the way people do when they think they're dealing with someone slow. That list has been updated as of this morning. Furthermore, we have in our possession a temporary protective order signed by Judge Beaumont. It states that you are not to have any contact with Eli Wyndham. He held up a sheet of paper. It was faxed. The ink was still fresh. Roland had moved fast. He'd called in his favors. He'd used his old connections from his time on the bench to seal off my family before I could even reach them. This is illegal," I said. "You are keeping a child from his family. His mother is in the hospital. His father has given us strict instructions." Blackwood cut in. "As you know, Mr. Wyndham is a pillar of this community. We take our students' safety very seriously. We cannot have violent individuals on campus. Violent." The word sat in the air between us. He looked at my work boots. He looked at my dark skin. He looked at a history he knew nothing about and slapped a label on it. "You are making a mistake, Blackwood," I said. "The only mistake would be allowing you near that boy," he replied. "Security is on their way. I suggest you return to wherever you came from." I looked through the glass doors toward the classrooms. Children were lining up for dismissal. I spotted the back of Eli's head. He had on his little green blazer. He looked so small. Every instinct told me to push through that glass to tear the door from its frame and take my grandson. But I knew that was exactly what they were counting on. They wanted the angry black man to make a scene. They wanted footage for the evening news. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't raise my voice. I walked with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who is memorizing every detail of the battlefield. I waited by my truck. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to lay eyes on him. I had to know he was physically all right. The restraining order said 500 yards. I positioned myself at the edge of the public sidewalk exactly 500 yards from the school entrance. I measured it on my phone. I was not going to hand them a technicality. 10 minutes later, a silver Maserati rolled up to the loading zone. Garrett. He stepped out in a suit that cost more than my first house. He looked wrung-out eyes, manic and darting, but the moment he spotted me standing on the corner, a slow, deliberate smile moved across his face. He walked to the gate where a teacher was holding Eli's hand. He signed the clipboard. He took Eli's hand, and then he didn't turn back toward the car. He walked toward me instead. He stopped about 10 feet away, just inside the property line. Eli looked up and found me. His eyes went wide and uncertain. "Grandpa!" Eli called out. "Hush, Eli," Garrett said, tightening his grip on the boy's hand. "Grandpa is not allowed to talk to us. Grandpa is a bad man." The words landed like fists. He was poisoning the well, twisting the love my grandson had for me into something that looked like fear. Garrett looked at me. His eyes were hollow. No soul lived there, just a raw, clawing hunger for more. "You look pathetic," Garrett Reginald said. "Standing there in those filthy clothes. Do you honestly think a judge hands custody to someone like you? You live in a shack. You smell like sawdust and sweat. Eli needs a legacy. He needs a future. He doesn't need to learn how to pour concrete." I held his gaze. My hands balled into fists at my sides. The urge to close that distance, to cross that invisible line and shatter his jaw was a physical thing, a deep ache in my bones. I could do it. I could finish him in seconds. I had spent 40 years hauling steel beams. He had spent 40 years raising martini glasses. But I caught the phone in his other hand. The camera lens was barely concealed in his pocket. He was recording. He was baiting me. He wanted me to throw the first punch right in front of his son. He wanted to hand the court exactly what they needed, proof that I was the monster they'd already decided I was. I drew a slow breath. I let the rage move through me like a current, and then I drove it down into that cold, dark chamber where I kept my business. "You're right, Garrett," I said. My voice was steady. That steadiness rattled him. I watched his smirk waver. "You are absolutely right. I'm just a working man. Go home." Garrett Wyndham sneered. "Get back to your side of town. Eli is a Wyndham. He belongs with his own people." He turned and pulled Eli toward the Maserati. Eli glanced back over his shoulder. He lifted a small, uncertain hand. I raised mine and waved back. I held a smile on my face for the boy. "I love you, Eli," I said under my breath. Garrett shoved him into the car and slammed the door hard. He tore away from the curb, the engine screaming, leaving me standing in a cloud of exhaust. I didn't move for a long time. The sun pressed down on the back of my neck. The humiliation sat on my skin like a brand. They believed they had won. They believed that because they held the keys to the gate, the power was theirs. They believed money was the only language worth speaking. Fine. If that was the language they wanted, I would become fluent in it. I climbed into my truck. I didn't turn the key yet. I reached for my secure phone, not the one I used to call Nadine. The other one, the phone I used to reach the people who managed the wealth I'd kept hidden from the world. I dialed a number that connected straight to a private office in Manhattan. It was the personal line of Warren Colby, the CEO of Colby and Marsh Private Bank. I wasn't merely a client there. I was the majority shareholder. I had pulled the bank back from the edge during the 2007 crash with liquid capital when every other institution was going under. They answered to me. Warren picked up on the first ring. "It's rare to hear your voice during trading hours. Is something wrong?" "Yes, Warren," I said. "I need you to open the ledger on the Wyndham Group." A pause followed the soft clatter of a keyboard. "Roland Wyndham," Warren said. "Reginald, that portfolio is toxic. We've been advising against acquiring their debt for years. They are over-leveraged. Their real estate is underwater. They are running on lines of credit and borrowed reputation." "I know," I said. "I want you to buy it anyway. Buy what Warren asked." "All of it," I said. "Every commercial loan, every personal line of credit. I want you to buy the mortgage on their estate in Ridgemore. I want you to buy the note on Garrett Wyndham's car. I want you to buy the debt on Roland's vacation home in the Hamptons. If they owe a single dollar to anyone in this country, I want to be the one collecting it." Reginald, Warren said, his voice dropping. "We are talking about tens of millions of dollars in bad debt. You will absorb a massive loss. This is not a sound investment." "It isn't an investment, Warren," I said. "It's an eviction notice." I stared at the empty stretch of curb where Garrett's car had been. "I want a hostile takeover of their entire existence," I said. "I want to own the roof above their heads. I want to own the vehicles they drive. I want to own the clothes on their backs. Call in the notes, Warren. All of them right now." "But sir, the default clauses," I cut him off. "They have missed payments." "I know they have. Use the acceleration clause. Demand full repayment within 24 hours. Warren went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was professional, cool, and precise. "It will be done. We'll acquire the debt packages by close of business today. Demand letters will be couriered to the Wyndham estate tomorrow morning." "Good," I said. "And Warren?" "Yes. Reginald, freeze their access to any new credit. Flag them as high risk. I want them to walk into a grocery store and watch their cards get declined. I want them to understand what it feels like to have nothing." "Understood." I ended the call. My hands were no longer shaking. The rage had drained away, replaced by the cold, mechanical rhythm of a plan already moving. Garrett had told me to get back to my side of town. He hadn't understood that my side of town owned his. He hadn't understood that the grime under my fingernails was worth more than his entire bloodline. I started the truck. The engine turned over with a low, grinding growl. "Enjoy tonight in the mansion, Garrett," I said to no one. "It's the last night you'll have there." I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home to grieve. I was going to prepare, because tomorrow the repo men were coming and I intended to lead the way. The grand ballroom of the Omni Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air reeked of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. The Wyndhams were hosting their annual charity gala, an event they'd branded the Foundation for Family Recovery. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy. On the surface, they were raising funds for addiction treatment centers. In reality, they were laundering their reputation. They needed the world to believe they were still the city's golden family, even as the walls of debt pressed in from every side. I stood in the shadow of the velvet curtains near the entrance. I wasn't in my work boots tonight. I had on a bespoke tuxedo cut from English wool, a garment that cost more than Garrett's first car. I straightened the obsidian cufflinks at my wrists. They felt cold and solid. I watched Claudette Wyndham step onto the stage. The spotlight found her catching the diamonds at her throat and the single tear placed perfectly on her cheek. She was a remarkable actress. My family has known real pain, she told the hushed crowd, her voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. We have watched how addiction can strip away the brightest souls. We are fighting to save our loved ones even when they refuse to be saved. A wave of sympathy moved through the room. They were talking about Nadine. They were using my daughter, the woman they had drugged and locked away as a prop, to draw donations from the city's elite. They were presenting her as a tragic addict and themselves as the burdened saintly in-laws carrying her weight. It was nauseating. Roland stood beside Claudette, nodding with practiced gravity. Garrett sat in the front row performing the role of the grieving husband. They were selling a lie to paper over their insolvency. These donations weren't going to any charity. They were needed to cover interest on their loans. They needed the social goodwill to hold the creditors off for one more month. I checked my watch. My banker Warren had confirmed the transfer of funds. The trap was set. I stepped out from the shadows. I didn't slip in quietly. I walked straight down the center aisle with the stride of a man who owns the building. Heads turned. Whispers followed. "Who is that? Is that the contractor? What is he doing here?" I saw Roland's eyes find mine across the room. His face turned the color of ash. He moved forward as if to flag down security, then stopped himself. He couldn't afford a scene. Not here. Not in front of the mayor and sitting senators. He had to hold the mask in place. I took my seat at the empty table marked for platinum donors right at the front. I picked up the auction paddle. Number 001. I had purchased the table anonymously that morning for $50,000. Claudette stumbled in her speech. She stared at me, lips parted. I filled my glass with water and raised it toward her in a quiet toast. "Go on, Claudette. Tell us more about your charity." She swallowed and pushed quickly to the end of her remarks. The applause that followed was polite and uneasy. The tension in the room was something you could feel on your skin. Everyone sensed I didn't belong, but the tuxedo and the table told them otherwise. They were caught frozen by the rules of their own social game. Then came the centerpiece of the evening, the auction. The items were brought forward. A vacation in Tuscany, a vintage wine collection. I sat perfectly still. I had no interest in the decorative items. I was holding out for the centerpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice filling the room. "Tonight we have a very special piece. Mrs. Claudette Wyndham has generously donated a family heirloom in support of the cause, the Wyndham Sapphire. A model stepped onto the stage wearing a necklace that blazed beneath the lights. A massive blue sapphire set in a crown of diamonds. I knew that necklace. Nadine had described it to me. It was the only genuine asset they still held that wasn't already pledged against a debt. Claudette wasn't giving it away out of generosity. She was liquidating it in public to raise fast cash, dressing the sale up as philanthropy so she could funnel the proceeds back into her own accounts through administrative fees. It was cunning, it was illegal, and it was about to belong to me. The bidding opens at $50,000, the auctioneer said. 50,000, a voice rang out from the back. 75, said another. It was a slow, grinding climb. The economy was grinding people down, and even the wealthy were feeling the squeeze. Or perhaps they simply sensed the desperation hovering over the room like a fog. 100,000, Garrett shouted. He was shill-bidding, trying to push the price up, fighting to protect whatever remained of his inheritance. It was a reckless game. If the hammer fell on him, they'd owe the house its commission and still be sitting on a necklace with no liquidity. 110, a real estate mogul countered. I raised my paddle. 200,000. The room fell silent. The auctioneer blinked. He glanced at me, then over at Roland. Roland looked like a man being told his heart had stopped. He couldn't do anything about it. Money was money. 200,000 to the gentleman in the front, the auctioneer said, stumbling over his words. Do I hear 220? Garrett stared at me with undisguised hatred. He lifted his hand. 250. It was a bluff. He didn't have $250,000. He was praying for someone else to step in and save him. 300,000. I said, my voice flat, my eyes locked on Garrett's. He froze. He couldn't go higher. If the bid landed on him, the fraud would unravel the moment his check bounced. He dropped his hand. Going once, the auctioneer said. 350, Roland shouted from beside the stage. He was unraveling. He couldn't let me walk away with it. I didn't so much as glance in his direction. 400,000. Roland's face went purple. He opened his mouth to respond, but Claudette seized his arm. She murmured something close to his ear, probably that they needed the cash more than their pride. Probably that $400,000 could silence the most dangerous creditors. Going twice, the auctioneer said, sweeping the room for a rescuer who wasn't coming. Sold to Mr. Dupree for $400,000. The gavel struck. It rang through the hall like a verdict. I rose from my seat. I fastened my jacket button. I climbed the stairs to the stage. The applause was thin, uncertain. The city's elite watched with a kind of morbid fascination as the black contractor crossed the stage toward the white matriarch. The auctioneer handed me the microphone, visibly uneasy. He passed me the velvet box holding the necklace. I took it. I looked down at the sapphire. Cold, heavy. Thank you, I said, my amplified voice spreading across the ballroom. It is an honor to contribute to such a creative cause. I turned my gaze to Claudette. She stood rigid, a frozen smile fixed to her face, waiting for me to collect my prize and disappear quietly. She expected me to go. I wasn't finished. I faced the audience. You know, I said my family always taught me that real value isn't stored in gemstones. It lives in character. It lives in how you treat people when you believe no one is watching. I scanned the room, searching for a specific face. Earlier in the evening, while I was still in the shadows, I had watched a server drop a tray of champagne flutes near the kitchen doors. Claudette had rounded on her, called her clumsy, stupid, and worthless. She had fired her on the spot and told her to clean up every shard before she left. I found the young woman now. She was crouched in a back corner on her hands and knees, collecting broken glass, while tears ran silently down her face. She was young, a Latina woman, probably no older than Nadine. "Excuse me," I said, pointing toward the rear of the room. "You, the young woman on the floor. Please come up here." The entire room turned. The girl looked up terrified. She went still. "Yes, you," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Please come to the stage." She hesitated. Her manager gave her a quiet nudge. She got to her feet, brushing fragments of glass from her black apron. She walked down the aisle, with her head down, certain she was in some new kind of trouble. By the time she reached the stage, her hands were shaking. "What is your name?" I asked. "Luciana, sir," she whispered. "Luciana," I said, projecting clearly so even the back row could hear. "Tonight I witnessed Mrs. Wyndham speak to you. I heard every word she said. She told you that you were worthless. She told you that you were nothing." Claudette's breath caught. "How dare you?" she hissed, stepping toward me. I didn't acknowledge her. I kept my eyes on Luciana. She was wrong, Luciana. The work you do, the work you put in every day to support your family, is worth more than every person seated at these tables. You carry dignity. You carry grace. I opened the velvet box. I lifted out the sapphire necklace. "I paid $400,000 for this," I said. It was the crown jewel of the Wyndham family, the thing they believed made them royalty. I turned to Luciana. "I want you to have it." A collective gasp pulled the air from the room. Somewhere a glass hit the floor. Sir Luciana stammered, "I cannot." "Yes, you can," I said. I fastened the heavy clasp around her neck. The diamonds caught the light and blazed against her plain black uniform. "It is yours," I said. "Sell it, pay for school, buy a home, start something of your own. Do whatever you choose, but never let anyone convince you that you are worth less than they are." I turned back to Claudette. Her face had collapsed into pure horror. She was watching her family's legacy, her financial lifeline, glittering around the neck of the young woman she had fired. "You wanted to sell your heritage to save yourself." "Claudette," I said, stepping off the microphone but keeping my voice low enough only she could hear. "Now you can watch it walk right out the door." I looked at Luciana. "Go," I said. "Don't look back." Luciana held my gaze, fresh tears rising, but these were entirely different from the ones before. "Thank you," she mouthed. Then she turned and ran down the stairs, one hand pressed to the necklace, heading for the exit, heading toward something new. I set the microphone down. It hit the floor with a resonant boom. I passed Roland on my way out. He was gripping his chest. I passed Garrett. He was staring at the floor, hollowed out. I walked the full length of the aisle through a room that had gone utterly still. Nobody moved to stop me. Nobody spoke. They drew apart like a tide pulling back. I stepped out into the cool night air. I had just spent $400,000 to make a single point. That was a significant sum. But watching the expression drain from Claudette Wyndham's face the moment she understood she had been outmaneuvered by the help that was beyond price. And I still had the receipt. The gala was over, but the night had more to give. I got back into my truck. Now I said to myself, "Let's go get my daughter." The gala had been a victory, but a hollow one. I had humiliated Claudette Wyndham, and yet my daughter was still out there. The adrenaline from the auction dissolved the moment I settled into the driver's seat, leaving a cold, dense knot of fear at the center of my chest. Orion had sent the coordinates to my secure phone. Cedar Ridge Behavioral Health was not a hospital. It was a fortress buried deep in the Cascade foothills, miles from cell towers and any prying eyes. I drove through the dark. The road shifted from asphalt to gravel, curling up into dense pine forest. The facility materialized out of the darkness like a specter. It was a sprawling brutalist structure, concrete and glass, wrapped in a 12-foot fence topped with razor wire. They called it a retreat for the troubled wealthy. I looked at the perimeter lighting and the guard towers and understood exactly what it was. It was a prison for inconveniences, a place where the elite deposited the wives who had heard too much and the children who had become embarrassing. I parked a mile back down the road in a logging turnout. I sat in the dark and studied the facility through my binoculars. Armed patrols, electronic keypads. If I tried to force that gate, I'd be shot before I reached the entrance. Roland Wyndham had taken note of his earlier mistakes. He had moved Nadine somewhere engineered to keep men like me out. But I am a builder. When I look at a structure, I don't see a fortress. I see blueprints. I see permits. I see codes. And I knew with certainty that a facility this remote, constructed this fast, had cut corners somewhere along the way. You cannot raise a building like that in this county without variances. You cannot operate a medical facility without rigorous inspections. And I knew all too well that money had a way of making inspectors suddenly go blind. I picked up my phone. Not to call my lawyer. I called Sheriff Beaumont. We had played high school football together 50 years ago. He was a decent man, one who despised the Wyndhams nearly as much as I did, because Roland had once made a drunk driving charge against Garrett disappear, a charge that had put Beaumont's nephew in a wheelchair. "Beaumont," I said when he picked up, "I know where she is, and I know how we get her out, but I need you to bring someone with you. I need you to bring Sorrells." Sorrells was the state building inspector, a man with no sense of humor whatsoever, and a near religious devotion to the fire code. He was the dullest person I had ever met, and at that moment, he was my sharpest weapon. I met them at the trailhead at first light. Beaumont was in full uniform, his face set hard. Sorrells had a clipboard in hand, and the expression of a man who resented every minute before sunrise. "This facility has been running on a provisional license for 3 years, I told Sorrells, gesturing toward the building. They claimed agricultural zoning to sidestep commercial fire codes. They have 20 patients locked behind magnetic doors, and I would stake my life on the sprinkler system not being connected to the main water line, because the main line doesn't reach this far up the mountain." Something lit up behind Sorrells's eyes. A code violation was a personal offense to him. "If that checks out," Sorrells said, "I have the authority to shut this operation down on the spot. Full evacuation order." "Let's go find out," I said. We pulled up to the main gate in the sheriff's cruiser. The guard came out with his hand resting on his holster. He clocked the badge on the door and went still. "Open the gate," Beaumont ordered over the loudspeaker. "Official business." The guard tried to stall. "I need to reach the director first. You open this gate or I take you in for obstruction," Beaumont snapped. The gate swung open. We rolled up to the main entrance. The director met us at the door, a slippery man in a white coat named Dr. Greer. The very man who had signed the fraudulent intake forms. "Sheriff," he said with an oiled smile. "To what do we owe this visit? We maintain strict privacy protocols here." I stepped out from behind Beaumont. Dr. Greer's smile evaporated. "This is not a courtesy call," I said. "This is a safety inspection." Sorrells moved past him without a word. No smile, no handshake. He walked straight into the lobby and tilted his head toward the ceiling. "Where are your smoke detectors?" he demanded. "Why are those exit signs dark? I want to see your generator logs. I want your water pressure certification." Dr. Greer sputtered. "We are fully compliant. We have a waiver on file." "There are no waivers when it comes to human life," Sorrells said. He crossed to the wall and yanked a fire alarm lever. Nothing. No sirens, no strobes. Sorrells turned around slowly. "This facility is a death trap," he said. I am revoking your occupancy permit effective immediately. Every patient must be transferred to a licensed hospital within 1 hour. Dr. Greer went the color of chalk. You cannot do this. Mr. Wyndham is not the fire marshal, Beaumont cut in. You heard him. Start evacuating. I didn't stay for the rest of that argument. While Dr. Greer was drowning in the paperwork of his own negligence, I slipped past the reception desk. I lifted a key card from the counter. I knew the layout. Orion had tracked down the building schematics. The high-security wing was in the basement. I took the stairs at a run. The air turned cold as I descended. The antiseptic smell hit like a wall, and beneath it, underneath the bleach and the sanitizer, something else. Fear and urine. I moved down the hall, peering through the narrow windows set in the heavy steel doors. Room 101 empty. Room 102. An old man rocking himself in the corner. Room 103. I looked through the glass. Nadine was inside. She was strapped to a bed in the center of the room, her wrists secured in leather cuffs. An IV drip ran into her arm. Her eyes were open but unfocused, aimed at the ceiling and seeing nothing. She looked like something broken and discarded. I pressed the keycard to the reader. The light blinked red. Access denied. I didn't hesitate. I stepped back and drove my boot into the lock mechanism. It sparked, but held. I kicked again, channeling everything, every sleepless night, every court date, every humiliation, into that one blow. The plastic housing cracked apart. I worked my pocket knife into the exposed wiring and twisted. The door clicked and slid open. Nadine. I whispered, moving to her side. She didn't respond, didn't flinch. I yanked the IV from her arm, not carefully, not gently. Getting the poison out of her veins was all that mattered. I worked at the straps on her wrists. They had been cinched tight, cutting into her skin. Her arms were bruised purple up to the elbow. What did they do to you? The words broke apart in my throat, my eyes burning. I freed one wrist, then the other. I pulled her upright. She sagged into me, her head lying on my shoulder. A thin line of saliva traced her chin. Dad, she mumbled. Her voice was thick, waterlogged. Dad, is that you? I'm here, baby. I said, gathering her into my arms. I'm right here. You need to leave, she slurred. They'll hurt you. Nobody is going to hurt us ever again, I told her. That is a promise. I carried her out into the corridor. 2 orderlies appeared at the far end of the hall. Large men, the kind accustomed to moving sedated patients without asking permission. Hey, one of them shouted. Put her down. I kept walking straight at them. I was holding my daughter, but I felt weightless. I felt like nothing on earth could stop me. Step aside, I said. They hesitated. They read what was in my eyes, a man who had already torn through a gate and bought a bank. They decided the pay wasn't worth it. They moved. I carried Nadine up the stairs and into the lobby. Sorrells was working through his citation list. Beaumont had Dr. Greer in handcuffs. I've got her, I said. Beaumont looked at Nadine's state and his jaw went hard. Get her to the vehicle, Reginald Beaumont said. I'll deal with this filth. I walked out into the daylight. I settled Nadine into the passenger seat of my truck, which I had pulled around after the raid. I buckled her in and wrapped my jacket around her trembling shoulders. As we drove away from that place, she began to cry. A low, keening sound, the sound of someone releasing something that had been compressed for a very long time. They made me sign, she wept. They held my hands and forced me to sign the papers. They took the land. Dad, we are going to get it back, I said, both hands on the wheel. No, she whispered. It's worse than that. Dad, you have to hear this. Tell me, baby, Garrett, she said, and her voice went suddenly sharp and lucid. Garrett was driving the car. What car the night of the accident, she said. The girl who died on Route 9. It wasn't a hit and run, Dad. Garrett hit her. He was drunk. He called his father. Roland came. They moved the body. I hit the brakes and pulled hard onto the gravel shoulder. Dust billowed around the truck. Say that again, I said. They moved her into the driver's seat of her own car. Nadine sobbed. They staged it to look like she had drifted into a tree, but Garrett hit her. I was in the passenger seat, Dad. I watched it happen. They told me if I breathed a word to anyone, they would kill me. That is why they put me in that place. I had threatened to go to the police. The cab of the truck went absolutely silent. The pieces snapped into alignment like something seismic shifting beneath the ground. This had never just been about money. It had never just been about the land. This was a murder cover-up. They had locked my daughter away, pumped her full of drugs, and tried to dismantle her mind, not only to strip her inheritance, but to stop her from putting Garrett Wyndham behind bars for vehicular manslaughter. I looked at her. Broken, terrified, and barely holding together, but alive. And she had just handed me everything. We are not going home, I said, and put the truck back in gear. Where are we going? She asked. We are going to verify a story, I said, and then we are going to bury them. I pointed the truck toward the city. The game had shifted completely. I wasn't fighting thieves anymore. I was hunting killers, and I knew exactly where to begin. The gravel gave way beneath the tires as I merged back onto the main road. Nadine was beside me, trembling inside my oversized work jacket, her face catching the pale glow of the dashboard. What she had just told me was heavy enough to pull a ship under. A dead girl. A cover-up. A hit and run made to look like something else. I needed every detail. I needed to know the full shape of what we were walking into. Nadine, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, I need you to walk me through all of it. From the beginning. Don't skip anything. She pulled a shaking breath. It was the night of the gala last year, she whispered. The one for the hospital. Garrett had been drinking since noon. He was furious because Roland had threatened to cut off his allowance if he didn't close a deal with some investors. We left early. He insisted on being behind the wheel. He said he was fine. He was driving the Maserati. We were on Route 9, that dark stretch near the reservoir. I knew that road. It was narrow, winding, and completely unlit. Dangerous territory for a sober driver, let alone one who'd been drinking since midday. He was going too fast. She went on, tears running down her face again. He was screaming at me, blaming me for his shortcomings. He took his eyes off the road to look at me. I screamed. There was a girl walking her bike along the shoulder. He hit her dad. He didn't swerve. He didn't brake. He struck her at 60 miles per hour. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. And then he didn't stop, she said. He kept driving for a full mile. Then the panic set in. He pulled off onto a logging road. He called Roland, not 911, his father. Roland arrived 20 minutes later with the family lawyer and two men I'd never seen before. They took my phone. They told me to sit in Roland's car and not to look. But you looked, I said. I looked, she confirmed. They drove back to where it happened. They found the girl. She was gone. They put her behind the wheel of her own car, which was parked nearby. They staged the whole scene. They made it look like she had lost control and gone into a tree. Then they had the Maserati taken to a private garage to be crushed. And they needed you to take the blame, I said, the bile climbing my throat. Months later, Nadine said the investigation wasn't going away. A witness had reported seeing a sports car. Roland told me that if it came to it, I had to say I was the one driving. He said Garrett had a future. He said Garrett was a Wyndham and I was nobody. He said a jury would be lenient with me. When I refused, when I told them I was going to the district attorney, that was when they staged the intervention. That was when they locked me up. They hadn't just wanted to take her money. They wanted to consume her entire life to cover for Garrett's crime. They were willing to lobotomize the mother of their grandchild to keep their son out of prison. It was a grade of evil I had not braced myself for. I had prepared for greed. I had not prepared for this. "We're not going to the police," I said. "Not yet. Roland owns the local precinct. If we walk in there tonight, we don't walk back out." I drove into the city to a hotel I held through a shell company. It wasn't luxury, but it was safe. I brought Nadine up the service elevator to the penthouse suite. I called a private doctor. I trusted a man who owed me his entire career to come and examine her. I called Orion and told him to pull the police report on the Route 9 accident. I wanted the girl's name. I needed to know who she was. "Stay here," I told Nadine. "Don't open the door for anyone. Don't touch the phone. I will be back." "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "I'm going home," I said. "I need to draw their fire." I drove back to my house in the suburbs, a modest 2-story colonial on a quiet street. I'd lived there for 30 years. It was the only home Nadine had ever known before she married into the Wyndham nightmare. When I turned onto my street, I found a circus waiting for me. News vans sat across my lawn. Satellite dishes were aimed at my front door. Reporters packed the sidewalk like vultures working a carcass. And standing at the center of it all behind a makeshift podium was Roland Wyndham. He wore a suit that belonged at a funeral. He looked devastated, convincingly, perfectly devastated. He was speaking into a cluster of microphones, his voice layered thick with manufactured grief. "We are pleading with Mr. Dupree," Roland said, dabbing at a tear that wasn't there. "Please, Reginald, we know you are angry. We know about your history of violence, but Nadine needs medical care. She is sick. She is a danger to herself. Please just bring her home. We will not press charges. We only want our daughter back." He was gifted. He was constructing a masterpiece of lies. He had flipped the entire narrative on its head. I wasn't the man who had rescued his daughter. I was the unstable, violent father who had snatched her from a treatment facility. He was working every stereotype with surgical precision. The angry black man, the gracious white patriarch, the tragic daughter caught between them. I parked my truck down the block. I walked toward the crowd. A reporter spotted me. "There he is," someone shouted. The cameras swung around. The lights hit me like a wall. Microphones were thrust into my face. "Mr. Dupree, did you assault the staff at Cedar Ridge Behavioral Health? Mr. Dupree, do you have a history of domestic violence? Mr. Dupree, is your daughter on heroin?" They weren't asking questions. They were delivering accusations in the shape of questions. Roland looked at me over the sea of cameras. He wasn't afraid. He was satisfied. He gave me a look that said, "You cannot win this. I own the story." I pushed through the crowd without a word. I didn't strike anyone, though every nerve in my body wanted me to. I walked up my driveway, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. I shut it hard on the noise outside. The house was quiet. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. I went to the living room window and tilted the blinds. Roland was wrapping up his performance. He looked like a statesman delivering remarks. The reporters were consuming every word. They were broadcasting his lies live to the entire state. My phone rang. It was Darnell. "Reginald, turn on the television," Darnell said. "Channel 4. I turned it on. A headline blazed across the bottom of the screen. "Grandfather kidnaps daughter, assaults hospital staff. Manhunt underway." "They've issued a warrant," Darnell said. Assault with intent to commit a felony. Kidnapping. The judge signed off on it 10 minutes ago. They are coming for you, Reginald. You need to get out. No, I said. If I run, I look guilty. If I run, they win. They are going to arrest you, Darnell warned. And this time it won't be polite. Roland has pulled strings at the state level. These won't be local officers. These will be state troopers. Or something worse. Let them come, I said. I hung up. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. I settled into my favorite armchair in the living room. I waited. 20 minutes later, the sirens started. Not one or two, a dozen. They tore down the street, swallowing the noise of the reporters whole. I heard tires shriek. I heard doors slam. Then the bullhorn. Reginald Dupree, this is the state police. Come out with your hands raised. I took a sip of coffee. I did not move. Seconds later, my front door came in. They didn't try the handle. A battering ram reduced my oak door to fragments. Men in tactical gear flooded into my living room. Assault rifles, shields. They looked like they were breaching a compound, not arresting a 68-year-old grandfather. Get on the ground. Now. I set my cup down carefully on the coaster. I lowered myself slowly to the carpet. I placed my hands behind my head. They were on me before I finished the motion. A boot came down on my back, driving the breath from my body. A knee pressed my face hard into the rug. They zip-tied my wrists so tight my fingers went numb within seconds. Clear one called. No sign of the girl, another answered. They hauled me to my feet and dropped me onto the sofa. A man in a suit walked in behind them. No uniform, a trench coat and a sneer he had probably been practicing for years. I knew him. Detective Sorrells. He had a reputation in the neighborhood, a reputation for discovering evidence that had a strange habit of appearing right where he needed it. He was Roland's fixer with a badge. Where is she? Sorrells said, pushing his face close to mine. Reginald. I stared at him. I said nothing. Suit yourself, Sorrells said. Boys go through everything. Drugs, weapons, anything that points to where he took her. They gutted my house. They ripped the cushions from the sofa. They swept the bookshelves bare. They smashed my wife's vase collection against the floor. It wasn't a search. It was a message. Sorrells stood by the fireplace and watched it all with his arms folded. He caught the eye of a uniformed officer near the kitchen doorway. The nod he gave was almost invisible. The officer, young with eyes that couldn't quite settle, slipped a hand into his pocket. He pulled out a clear plastic bag packed with white powder. He walked across the room toward my recliner, the very chair I'd been sitting in minutes before. He crouched down beside it. He made a show of looking beneath the cushion. When his hand came back up, the bag was in it. What comes next changed everything, and it cost more than I ever expected to carry. Before I get there, let me ask you something. If you knew the truth about a terrible wrong, but speaking up meant risking everything you had left, would you stay quiet and gather your proof? Or would you speak the moment you knew? Sarge, the officer, called out. Found something. Sorrells crossed the room. He lifted the bag with a gloved hand and held it up toward the light. Well, well, Sorrells said, turning to me with an expression of rehearsed disappointment. Heroin. Quite a bit of it. Looks like we've just located the source of your daughter's addiction, Reginald. Looks like you're not just a kidnapper. You're a dealer. My pulse should have been hammering. I should have been screaming that it was planted. I should have been on my knees, begging someone to listen. Instead, I sat there still as a frozen lake. I watched Sorrells bag the evidence. I watched the officers congratulate each other without moving a muscle. They believed they had buried me. They believed they had the weapon that would put me away for 20 years, and hand Roland full custody of Nadine and the land. Sorrels walked over and crouched down close to my ear. "You picked the wrong family to go up against, old man," he murmured. "You are going to die inside a cell." I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. Maybe I said, "Or maybe you should have checked the ceiling first." Sorrels frowned. "What?" I tilted my head upward. In the corner of the room, nestled inside the smoke detector, a small red light pulsed steadily. It was one of 12 4K cameras I had installed 5 years ago after a break-in down the street. It had recorded the entire raid. It had captured the destruction room by room. And it had recorded in perfect high definition the officer drawing the bag of heroin from his own pocket and pressing it beneath my cushion. And it wasn't saving to a local hard drive. It was streaming to a cloud server in real time, a server Darnell had access to, a server that was at that very moment feeding a live private link to my legal team. Sorrels looked up. He found the lens. The color left his face faster than water through a cracked hull. I smiled. It was the first time all day. "Smile, detective," I said. "You're about to be famous." Sorrels lunged for it, ripping the smoke detector from the ceiling and slamming it against the floor. He ground the pieces under his boot until they were nothing but plastic fragments. "Too late," I said. "It's already in the cloud." Sorrels looked at me then with hatred that was raw and total. He understood his career had just ended. He understood he was headed for prison. But he also understood he had a firearm, and I was zip-tied to a sofa. "Get him out," Sorrels shouted, his voice fracturing. "Get him to the precinct right now." They dragged me through the front of the house. The cameras outside strobed. The reporters shouted over one another. Roland was still out there, shaking his head with practiced sadness as I was marched out in restraints. He looked at me with something designed to resemble pity. He thought the drugs had been found. He thought the play had worked. I looked at him as they pushed me into the back of the cruiser. I didn't shout. I simply nodded. "Go ahead, Roland," I thought. "Drink this in. Because tomorrow morning I am going to release that footage, and tomorrow morning the entire world is going to see exactly the kind of people you are." The car moved. I settled back in the seat. I was going to jail again, but this time I wasn't walking in empty-handed. I was walking in with a detonator, and the fuse was already burning. Darnell Royce came through the door of the interrogation room 3 hours after they booked me. No briefcase, a tablet. He set it flat on the metal table between me and the precinct captain, who had spent the last hour trying to get me to put my name on a confession. Darnell didn't say anything at first. He just pressed play. The footage was sharp, crystal clear 4K. It showed my living room. It showed the officers dismantling my sofa piece by piece. And then, in slow motion, it showed Detective Sorrels reach into his own pocket, produce a bag of white powder, and tuck it beneath the cushion. The timestamp was airtight. The angle left nothing to debate. The captain's face emptied out completely. He looked like a man who had bitten into something he couldn't swallow. "You have 5 minutes to process my client's release." Darnell set his voice like stone on stone. "Or I send this to every news outlet in the state. And Captain, I will also be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against you personally before lunch." I was out in 10 minutes. They returned my belt. They returned my shoelaces. Not one of them looked me in the eye. Sorrels was nowhere in the building. He was probably already cleaning out his locker or dialing an attorney. I didn't go to the hospital. I went home. I needed to set the stage properly. I walked into my house. It was a wreck. Furniture on its side, books scattered and torn, the drywall punched through in 2 places. It looked like something violent had passed through and decided to stay. I didn't touch a thing. I left it exactly as it was. I went to the kitchen. The kettle was one of the few items still intact. I filled it and set it on the stove. I stood and listened for the whistle. I made a cup of black coffee. Then I sat down in my armchair, the very one Sorrells had used for his little performance, and I took a slow sip. It was hot. It steadied me. I picked up my phone. I pulled up my social media account. I had barely touched it over the years, mostly just monitoring industry news. Tonight it was going to serve a different purpose. I uploaded the video. No music. No filter. I titled it simply, "The Truth About the Wyndham Raid." I hit post. Then I waited. It took 12 minutes. That is how fast the world moves now. The first 1,000 views came from the neighborhood. Then it jumped to 10,000, then 50,000. The comments poured in like a flood tide. Nobody was talking about the angry black kidnapper anymore. They were talking about the dirty cop. They were talking about the plant. They were talking about corruption. Justice for Reginald began trending statewide. I took another sip of coffee. I watched the numbers climb. 100,000 views. 500,000. Outside, the character of the noise began to shift. The reporters were still camped on my lawn like they owned it, but they weren't hurling accusations at my door anymore. They were hurling questions at the police cruisers trying to slip away from the scene. I got to my feet. I buttoned my flannel shirt. I knocked the dust from my jeans. Time for the second act. I pushed open my front door. The camera flashes fired immediately a solid wall of white. I stepped out onto the porch. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't look down. I fixed my eyes on the lens of the largest news van in the crowd. "Mr. Dupree, is the video authentic? Did the police plant the drugs? Where is your daughter?" I lifted one hand. The noise settled. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted fury. I gave them ice. "My name is Reginald Dupree," I said. My voice reached across the lawn without a microphone. "Earlier today, I was arrested for kidnapping my own daughter. I was accused of being a drug trafficker. You have all seen the footage by now. You know that was a lie. But you still don't know the biggest lie." I reached down and lifted a stack of documents Darnell had prepared. They were heavy dents with information printed on thick bond paper. "You have been told that the Wyndhams are the victims here," I went on. "You have been told that I am a violent man attacking a distinguished family. But you have not been told who paid for that distinction." I held up the first document. A foreclosure notice from 3 years ago, quietly settled out of court. "The Wyndham family is bankrupt," I said plainly. A ripple of audible shock moved through the press pool. Reporters began typing furiously. "They have no liquid assets," I said. "Their businesses are hollow. Their investments have vanished. For the past 2 years, they have been surviving on loans they cannot repay and donations siphoned from the charity foundation they claim to operate." I tossed the document into the crowd. A reporter dove for it. I raised the next one. It was a bank statement from the foundation. "This is the ledger for the Foundation for Family Recovery," I said. "You all donated to it last night. You believed you were helping people in addiction. You weren't. Look at the withdrawals, private jet charters, jewelry purchases, payments on a Maserati, payments on a mortgage." I released that document too. It caught the wind and dropped like something already dead. "They stole from the sick to maintain their lifestyle," I said. "And when that ran dry, they came for me. They came for my daughter. They tried to lock her away and keep her sedated until she signed over the last thing she owned, a piece of land worth $10 million. I looked directly into the camera. Roland Wyndham is not a philanthropist. He is a parasite. And he is broke. I turned and walked back inside. I slammed the door shut and took no more questions. I'd given them enough of myself for one day. I returned to my armchair. I finished my coffee. The quiet inside the house pressed down like a weight, but out in the world, everything was shrieking. An hour later, the counterattack came. I'd been expecting it. Roland Wyndham was a rat backed into a corner, and cornered rats do what rats do. I switched on the television. Claudette Wyndham was live on Channel 5. She sat in her parlor in a modest beige sweater looking small and breakable. A handkerchief was pressed to her eyes. She had always been a master of optics. "He is a violent man," Claudette sobbed. She looked straight into the camera, her eyes wide and frightened. "We tried to help him. We tried to help his daughter, but what we get in return is hatred. He hates people like us." She let that hang there a moment, letting the implication do its work. She was playing the race card, but she'd flipped the whole deck. She was sculpting me into the aggressor, the angry black man, coming to tear down a civilized white family. "He destroyed our gate," she continued, voice quivering. "He beat our security guard, and now he floods the world with lies. These documents he's waving around forgeries. He's a criminal. He has ties to the underworld. We are living in fear. We are prisoners inside our own home." She dabbed at a tear. "We only want our grandson back," she whispered. "We only want to feel safe." It was a polished performance. It would have landed yesterday. But today, the internet had watched a cop stuff heroin into my sofa cushions. Today, the internet was combing through the bank records I'd put in front of them. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Warren at the bank. "Did you catch the interview?" I asked. "I did," Warren said. "She's very convincing." "Is the paperwork in order?" I asked. "It is," Warren said. "We hold the debt. We hold the mortgage. We hold the lines of credit." "Send it," I said. "Send what exactly?" "Reginald, the demand letter." "No," I said, "send the foreclosure notice. Accelerate the debt. They are in default. 3 missed payments on the house in the last 6 months. The old bank looked the other way because of who they are." "I am not the old bank," Reginald, Warren cautioned. "If we move on this, we have to give them notice." "Give them 24 hours, I said. "Tell them they have 24 hours to pay the full balance of the mortgage, $4.5 million. Or we seize the property." "They don't have $4 million, Warren said. "I know," I replied. "That is the point." I hung up. I crossed to the window. The sun was going down. The reporters were still camped outside, trimming their footage for the evening news cycle. Claudette Wyndham wanted to talk about being a prisoner in her own home. By tomorrow, she wouldn't have a home to be a prisoner in. I settled back into my seat. A deep exhaustion had begun seeping into my bones. I missed Nadine. I missed Eli. I wanted to be a grandfather who took his grandson out fishing. Instead, I was a general fighting a war I had never asked for. But I would see it through. I would peel away every layer of armor they had. I would take their money. I would take their name. I would take their house. And when they were standing naked in the street, shivering in the cold truth of everything they'd built and broken, maybe then they'd understand what powerlessness actually felt like. My phone pinged. A text from Orion. "Garrett is on the move," it read. I stared at those words. Garrett wasn't at the house. He wasn't with his parents. He was out there somewhere desperate and dangerous. "Where is he headed?" I typed back. "Unknown," Orion replied. "He killed his location services, but he bought a gun an hour ago." I set the phone down. The game had shifted underneath me again. We'd moved beyond money. We'd moved beyond reputation. We were stepping into the final phase, violence. I ran a check on my security system. The cameras were rolling. The doors were reinforced, but a lock only ever stops an honest man. And Garrett Wyndham was no longer honest. He was a caged animal. I got up and walked to the gun safe in the hallway closet. I worked the combination. The heavy door swung open. I reached in and pulled out my old service revolver. It was cold, dense steel. I hadn't held it in years. I checked the cylinder. Loaded. I set the gun on the table beside my coffee cup. "Come on, Garrett," I whispered to the empty room. "Come and get it." The foreclosure notice hit the Wyndham mansion like a mortar round, blasting apart the illusion of their untouchability. But rats don't simply die when their nest burns, they bite. Garrett Wyndham was a man who had never heard the word no in his entire life. And now his money, his standing, and his home had all been stripped away. He snapped. My private investigator Orion called me at 2 a.m. His voice wound tight with urgency. The tracker on Garrett's phone had gone dark, but not before pinging near the safe house where Claudette and Roland were hiding. Garrett hadn't gone there for comfort. He'd gone there for leverage. I drove to the safe house, burning up the asphalt under my tires. The front door hung wide open, a gaping maw in the night. Inside, everything was chaos. Claudette was on the floor, pressing a cloth against a bleeding gash on her forehead, her perfectly coiffed hair wrecked and wild. Roland was screaming into a dead phone, his face gone purple with rage and terror. He took him. Claudette sobbed, rocking where she sat. He took Eli. He said he needed insurance. My heart stopped cold. He had taken his own son, a 5-year-old boy used as a bargaining chip by a father who had come apart at the seams. He was high, Claudette choked out. I could smell the chemical sweat coming off him. He was crashing Reginald. He was shaking. He had a gun. He took the silver sedan, the one the bank hadn't seized yet, because it was leased under a shell company. I did not offer Claudette any comfort. I did not offer Roland any help. I turned on my heel and walked out. My grandson was in the hands of a desperate addict with a loaded gun, and every second I burned, listening to their whimpering, was a second Eli was in danger. My phone rang at 3:15. Blocked number. I answered it before the second ring, squeezing the phone so hard I could feel the plastic flecks. Reginald. Garrett's voice was jagged, broken glass wrapped around sheer panic. "I know you're listening." "Where is he, Garrett?" I asked, my voice the eye of the storm, perfectly still, perfectly deadly. "He is right here," Garrett said. "He is sleeping for now." Then came the sound that I still hear in the dark. A high-pitched, manic laugh that sounded wet and ugly. "I want $10 million, Reginald. Cash unmarked and a helicopter at the private airfield in 2 hours. Or Eli wakes up in a world of hurt." "You are digging a hole you will never climb out of," I said, keeping him talking, trying to get a fix on where he was. "I am already in the hole," he screamed, his voice cracking open. "You put me here. You tore my life apart. You took my house. You took my money. Now you're going to fund my way out." A small whimper drifted through from the background. "Daddy, I want to go home." "Shut up, Garrett," barked voice swinging away from the phone. "Do not touch him, Garrett," I said, dropping my voice a full octave. "You lay a hand on one hair on that boy's head, and there is no corner of this earth that will hide you from me. 10 million 2 hours, or I start sending pieces." The line went dead. Roland had trailed me out to the driveway. He looked aged suddenly, the arrogance scoured off his face by the reality of what his son had become. "Call the police," Roland demanded, his hands trembling. "Call the FBI. We need a negotiator." "No," I said. "You own the police chief. You have dinner with the FBI director. If I make that call, they turn this into a siege. They bring snipers. They ring the building. Garrett is paranoid and running on fumes. The moment he sees a flashing light, he will kill Eli. He will not hesitate. Then what exactly are we going to do?" Roland asked. And for the first time in all the years I'd known him, genuine fear lived in his voice. We cannot just let him run. I am going to handle it, I said. My way. I walked away from the broken patriarch. I climbed into my truck. I didn't turn the key right away. I sat in the dark and breathed in the smell of old leather and road dust. I needed a plan that didn't come with sirens. I needed an army that didn't carry badges. I picked up my secure phone again. I didn't call a banker. I didn't call a lawyer. I called Big Ray. Big Ray was the head of the Tri-State Transport Union, a man I'd worked alongside on the docks 40 years back, a man whose pension fund I had personally shielded when corporate vultures came circling in the 90s. He owed me nothing, but he'd give me everything. Reginald Ray's voice rumbled like a diesel engine turning over. It's late. I need eyes, Ray, I said. Every set of eyes you can put on the road. What are we looking for? Silver sedan, late model license plate, Bravo Lima 69er, driven by a desperate man with a 5-year-old boy. Ray didn't ask why. He didn't ask for police reports. He understood that a call from me at this hour meant someone's life was on the line. Consider it done, brother. Within 10 minutes, the word was out. Not over the police band. Over CB radios. Over the encrypted dispatch channels of every trucking outfit, every construction crew, every sanitation fleet in the state. I had built this city, not just the buildings, but the arteries running beneath them. I had hired the men who poured the concrete. I had paid for the receptions of the women who drove the buses. I had stood on the picket lines when strikes turned ugly. They didn't know me as the wealthy recluse Reginald Dupree. They knew me as the man who never bounced a check, the man who kept his word, the man who was one of them. The city stirred awake. Headlights blinked on at truck stops along the interstate. Delivery vans rerouted themselves down secondary roads. Garbage trucks crawled through alleyways and dead ends. Construction workers on the night shift climbed their cranes and scanned the dark horizon. 20,000 pairs of eyes were out there searching for my grandson. Garrett believed he was threading through an empty night. He thought the roads were nothing but asphalt and white lines. He had no idea he was moving through a living web woven from loyalty, sweat, and sacrifice. And I was the spider at the center, pulling every strand. I drove toward the city phone propped on the dashboard. I watched the reports come in on the secure app Ray used for union business. Nothing on Route 9, clear on the interstate, nothing downtown. Then at 4 a.m, the radio crackled to life. Got him, a voice said, deep and gravelly. Concrete mixer 42. He just rolled past me on the service road near the old industrial park. Driving erratic. He's heading for the abandoned warehouses by the river. The industrial park. My old stomping grounds. I knew every inch of that place. I'd helped pour the foundations for half those warehouses back in the 80s. It was a maze of rusted iron and fractured concrete. A perfect place for a rat to go to ground. Don't engage, I ordered. Keep eyes on him only. Block the exits if you can, but stay out of sight. 10-4, mixer 42 out. I turned the engine over. My truck growled to life. I'm coming, Eli, I whispered. I set down the radio. I wasn't a grandfather anymore. I wasn't a businessman. I was a force of nature, and I was bringing the storm with me. I drove fast but deliberate. I knew the layout of the industrial park intimately. There was one way in and one way out unless you knew where the service tunnels ran. Garrett would box himself in. He'd make for the largest structure the old iron foundry convinced he could hold out there. As the miles rolled under me, I thought about the man Garrett had turned into. He was the product of a world that taught him everything had a price and everything could be bought. He believed money was power. He believed influence was power. He never grasped that real power lies in the hands of the people who build your world, The ones who drive your roads, the ones who fix your pipes at midnight. He had spent his whole life looking down on those people. Now they were the ones closing in on him. I killed my headlights as I came up on the industrial sector. The silhouette of a concrete mixer sat across the north road, sealing it off. The driver flashed his lights once. I gave him a nod. I eased into the shadow of a crumbling warehouse. I checked my revolver one final time. 6 rounds. No safety. I stepped out of the truck. The air carried the smell of rust and river water. Everything was still. Too still. Then I heard it. A child crying. Faint, bouncing off the iron walls of the old foundry. Eli. I moved toward the sound. Moved like a ghost. Years of walking active construction sites had taught me how to cross a floor without disturbing the air around me. I reached the main doors of the foundry. Chained shut, but the side entrance hung ajar. I slipped through. The vast interior was lit by a single work light Garrett must have hauled in with him. He was pacing the catwalk 20 feet above the concrete floor, shouting into his phone, probably trying to reach his father. Eli sat on the catwalk floor, knees pulled tight to his chest, trembling. I stepped into the light. Garrett. I said, my voice rolling through the hollow space. He wheeled around and brought the gun up. He looked feral, eyes wide and shot through with red, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Stay back, he screamed. I will shoot him, Reginald. I swear to God I will do it. I stopped. I raised my hands, slow and open. It's over, Garrett, I said, keeping my voice level. The police aren't coming. Your father isn't coming. It's just the two of us. Where is my money? He demanded, the gun swinging between me and Eli. Where is my helicopter? There is no money, I said. There never was. You've been broke for years, Garrett. Liar, he shrieked. My father has millions. Your father is leveraged to the hilt, I said, taking one slow step forward. I own his debt. I own his house. I own this building we're standing in right now. There is nothing left. It is all gone. He reeled back as though I'd shoved him. The truth of it was piercing through the drug-soaked fog at last. No, he whispered. No, I'm a Wyndham. You are a criminal, I said. You killed a girl. You drugged your wife. You took your own son hostage. That is what your name means now. He looked at Eli, then he looked at me. His face caved in on itself. Then I've got nothing left to lose, he said, raising the gun to his own temple. No! I shouted, lunging a step forward. But he didn't pull it. Instead, he laughed a low, broken, sobbing laugh. You want him? He said, swinging the barrel back toward Eli. Come and take him. He grabbed Eli by the collar and hauled him to the edge of the catwalk. The railing was rusted through and half collapsed, 20 feet of open air to concrete below. I went still. Let him go, Garrett. You come up here, he said. You come up here and we trade places. You want to be the hero, then be the hero. I looked at the rusted staircase. I looked at my grandson's face, white with terror. All right, I said. I'm coming up. I moved to the stairs. My knees burned, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I climbed. I climbed toward the man who had torn my family apart. And I prayed I had one good fight left somewhere inside me, because only one of us was walking out of that foundry, and it was not going to be him. The metal stairs groaned beneath my weight as I went up toward the catwalk. Every step was a negotiation between gravity and 68 years of wear on my joints, but I did not stop. I kept my eyes fixed on Garrett Wyndham the whole way. He stood 20 feet above the concrete floor, swaying. his expensive suit destroyed by sweat and filth. He had Eli by the back of his shirt, holding him out over the edge like a rag doll. Eli wasn't crying anymore. He'd gone somewhere beyond tears, gone silent, and still his small hands clamped around Garrett's wrist, his eyes locked onto mine. I reached the top of the landing. The catwalk was narrow, eaten through with rust, bathed in the harsh yellow wash of the work light Garrett had hung from a beam overhead. We were suspended in the blackness of the abandoned foundry, a steel cage where the only authority was gravity. Garrett pointed the gun at me, then at Eli, then back at me. His hand shook so badly the barrel was a blur. "Don't move, Reginald!" he screamed, voice fracturing. "Don't take one more step, or I drop him. I swear I will drop him." I stopped, 10 feet between us. Close enough to see his pupils blown wide open. Close enough to catch the acrid reek of fear and withdrawal coming off him in waves. He was crashing hard. The drugs were clawing their way out of his system, and raw reality was flooding in to fill every crack they left behind. He stared at me with equal parts hatred and desperate, wordless pleading. He wanted me to save him, and he wanted me dead. "Let the boy go, or it," I said, keeping my hands open and in plain sight. "This is between you and me. Eli has no part in this." "He has everything to do with this," Garrett spat. "He is my insurance. He is the only reason you haven't put a bullet in me already." "I don't have a gun, Garrett." I lied. My revolver was pressed cold against my spine at the small of my back, but I couldn't reach for it. Not with Eli that close to the edge. If my aim was off, if I startled him, Eli would go over. I had to talk him down. I had to break him without laying a hand on him. "You think you're so clever." Reginald Garrett laughed a high, thin sound. "You think you beat us. You think you stripped us of everything. But my father will put this right. He always does. He is on the phone with the governor right now. He is getting the money together. The helicopter will be here any minute." I looked at him with pity. Genuine pity. He was a grown child, still waiting on a father who was never coming to rescue him. "Garrett," I said, my voice low and even. "Your father is not calling the governor." "Shut up," Garrett screamed. "You don't know him. He is Roland Wyndham. He owns this state." "Your father is at Teterboro Airport," I said. "He filed a flight plan 30 minutes ago. Private charter to the Cayman Islands. One way." Garrett went rigid. The gun dipped an inch. "Liar," he breathed. "He is not alone." I pressed, pushing the opening. "Your mother is with him. They emptied the wall safe, Garrett. They took the emergency cash. They took the diamonds. They cleared out of the house 20 minutes after you took Eli." "No," Garrett said, shaking his head. "No, they wouldn't do that. We are a family." "They are survivors, Garrett," I said. "And they looked at the board and decided you were the liability. They understood the murder charge was going to stick. They knew the fraud investigation was going to reach them, so they cut you loose. You are the sacrifice. You are the reason they walk away clean." I took a step forward. The metal grating rang softly underfoot. "They left you here to absorb the fall," I said. "They're probably halfway across the Atlantic by now, toasting each other and drafting the press statement about their troubled son, who went off the rails." Garrett's face cracked. The arrogance ran out of him like water, leaving nothing but a frightened boy. "That is not true," he whimpered. "Call them. Call my mother." "I can't call them, Garrett," I said. "They switched their phones off. Try it yourself." Garrett's eyes went to his phone lying on the catwalk floor where he had dropped it. He looked at me. He looked at Eli. The gun wavered. His grip on the situation was slipping. He had to know. He had to prove me wrong. To pick it up, I said. Call her. Ask her where she is. Garrett crouched slowly, dragging Eli down with him, never releasing the boy's shirt. He scooped up the phone in his gun hand, fumbling at the screen. He pressed it to his ear. I watched his face. I saw the exact moment it went to voicemail. I saw him dial again. I watched the desperation climb. Pick up, he muttered. Mom, pick up. It's me. Please pick up. Silence. Just the dead air of the foundry and the mechanical voice on the other end. I took another step. 8 feet. She is not going to answer, Garrett, I said quietly. She is gone. You are on your own. Garrett let the phone go. It dropped through the grate and fell 20 feet to the concrete below, shattering apart on impact. He stared at the empty space where it had been. His whole world had just collapsed. The illusion of the Wyndham dynasty, the safety net he had leaned on for 35 years, had given way beneath him. He looked up at me. His eyes were filling. They left me, he whispered. They actually left me. They did, I said. But I am standing right here and I am not going anywhere. Give me the boy, Garrett. It is finished. He looked down at Eli. For a moment, I was certain he was going to do it. I thought he was about to hand him over and let it end. I saw his muscles soften. I saw the barrel of the gun drift toward the floor. But then, the darkness snapped back. It wasn't the drugs this time. It was the despair. The understanding that he was headed to prison for the rest of his life, and that the people he had worshipped had sold him out. His face twisted into something hollow and savage. If I'm going down, he hissed, leveling the gun again, I am taking everything you love with me. He didn't aim at me. He aimed at Eli's head. No, I shouted. Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger. His eyes were wide empty and utterly gone. He was going to do it. He was going to kill his own child just to wound me. I did not think. I did not calculate. I moved. I closed the 6 feet between us in a single lunge. I didn't go for the gun. I went for Eli. I threw my body between the weapon, and my grandson wrapped both arms around the boy and wrenched my back toward the threat. The gunshot was deafening, a cannon fired inside a tin box. The muzzle flash whited out my vision. Something hit my left shoulder like a sledgehammer, spinning me sideways. The breath left my body in one hard rush. I slammed against the railing, holding Eli tight against my chest. "Grandpa!" Eli screamed. I hit the metal grate hard. My shoulder was ablaze, a burning, tearing agony that shot down my arm and clawed up into my neck. I looked down. My shirt was already dark with blood, but Eli was unharmed. He was crying, but he was whole. I looked up. Garrett was standing over us, the gun trailing smoke from the barrel. He looked stunned, as though some part of him hadn't believed the weapon would actually fire. He stared at me, then at the gun, then at me again. He raised it for a second shot. I reached for my revolver, but my left arm was dead. Useless. I fumbled for my waistband with my right hand and knew I was already too slow. Garrett was going to finish it. "Goodbye, Reginald," he whispered. Then the foundry doors exploded open. It wasn't the police. It was Darnell's private security team. They didn't issue warnings. They didn't request surrender. They moved with military precision. 3 men in tactical black gear poured through the side entrance like shadows. "Down!" One of them commanded, his voice amplified and absolute. Garrett spun around, distracted. That was all they needed. A single shot from the ground floor, not a lethal round. A beanbag round from a tactical shotgun. It caught Garrett dead center in the chest. He folded like a bad hand of cards, the gun clattering free as he gasped, and dropped backward, hitting the metal grate with a hollow, ringing thud. Before he could gather himself, the security team was on him. They swarmed up the stairs, boots hammering the metal. Two of them drove Garrett face down and zip-tied his hands and feet before he could take a breath. The third man, broad as a doorframe, a medic's patch on his vest, dropped to one knee beside me. "Mr. Dupree," he said, pressing a gauze pad firmly against my shoulder. "Stay with me." I looked at Eli. He was locked onto my good arm, his face buried in my chest. "Is he all right?" I rasped, the taste of copper thick in my mouth. "He's fine, sir," the medic said, running a quick check over the boy. "Not a scratch on him. You took the hit." I looked across the catwalk at Garrett. He was screaming now, thrashing against the restraints, cursing his parents, cursing me, cursing the whole world. He looked small. He looked pitiful. The medic bore down on my wound. The pain was blinding white, searing, and absolute. But underneath it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A deep, settled peace. "It's over," I whispered to Eli, moving my trembling hand through his hair. "It's all over." Darnell walked into the foundry a moment later, a trench coat thrown over his pajamas. He took in the scene, the blood, the subdued gunman, the terrified child, and came up the stairs without a word. He stood over me. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out, Reginald," he said, his voice carrying the faintest tremor. "Did you get them?" I asked, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "We got them," Darnell said. Airport security held Roland and Claudette at the gate. Their passports had been flagged. Your bank froze their accounts mid-transaction. They are in custody. I closed my eyes. The fire in my shoulder kept spreading, but so did the victory. "Good," I said. Garrett was still screaming as they hauled him down the stairs. "I am a Wyndham. You cannot do this to me." I opened my eyes and found him one last time. "You are nothing, Garrett." I said, my voice faint, but it carried clean through the silence. "You are just a man who owes a debt, and I am here to collect." The medic lifted me onto a stretcher. Eli refused to release my hand, so they let him stay beside me. As they carried me out into the cool morning air, I looked up at the sky. The sun was climbing, washing the clouds in gold and purple. I was bleeding. I was broken. I was spent. But I had my grandson. And the Wyndham Empire was nothing but cinders scattered on the wind. "We won, Eli!" I breathed as the darkness crowding the edges of my vision began to move in. We won. While the paramedics were cutting the blood-soaked shirt from my back in the ambulance, my lawyer Darnell was receiving a play-by-play of the scene unfolding at JFK International Airport. It was a scene I had designed with the precision of a demolition crew. Roland and Claudette Wyndham were trying to leave the country. They had booked 2 first-class tickets to the Cayman Islands on a commercial flight because their private charter had been grounded by a lien I placed on the aircraft an hour earlier. They were standing at the check-in counter, ringed by Louis Vuitton luggage, doing their best to look like a power couple departing on holiday, rather than 2 fugitives fleeing the wreckage of everything they'd built. According to the report, Roland handed the ticket agent his platinum credit card with the bearing of a man who owns the airline. He was sweating, though. His eyes swept the terminal, scanning for police, for creditors, for me. The agent swiped the card. She frowned. She swiped it again. I can picture the look on Roland's face when she glanced up and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined." Roland must have forced out that nervous, high-pitched laugh of his. "Run it again," he would have insisted. "There's been a mistake. That card has $1 million limit." But there was no mistake. My bank had frozen every asset tied to his social security number. He produced another card. Declined. Another. Declined. Claudette began hissing at him, her voice climbing in panic, telling him to fix it, telling him not to humiliate her in public. People were turning to stare. The line behind them was growing impatient. Finally, in a burst of desperation, Roland yanked a stack of cash from his briefcase. "Here," he barked, slapping the bills on the counter. $5,000. Just give us our boarding passes." That was the mistake. Large cash transactions at an international terminal set off protocols. The agent signaled security. Then came the passports. Roland had paid a forger $10,000 for 2 Rush passports under assumed names. They were high-quality fakes, the kind that might slip past a hotel desk clerk, but not the Department of Homeland Security database. The agents scanned them. A silent alarm fired in the TSA office. Within seconds, 4 federal agents materialized out of the crowd. They did not ask politely. They had no interest in Roland's golf handicap or Claudette's charity galas. They seized Roland by both arms and drove him into the ticket counter. Claudette screamed, claiming assault, claiming she knew the governor, claiming they were making a catastrophic mistake. The entire terminal watched as the great Wyndham matriarch was handcuffed and pressed face down against the cold linoleum, her skirt riding up her dignity gone. They were dragged out, screaming, their expensive luggage left spinning on the carousel. They didn't make their flight. They made the evening news. 12 hours later, I walked into the county detention center. My left arm was strapped in a sling against my chest. The bullet wound pulsed with a dull, heavy ache that ran up into my neck, but the pain kept me focused. It reminded me why I'd come. I had turned down the strong painkillers. I needed to be clear. I needed to remember every moment of this conversation. Darnell tried to stop me. He told me to go home and sleep. He said the lawyers would take care of it. But this was personal. I needed to see her. I needed to look her in the face one final time. The guard walked me to the visitation room. It was a small concrete box split down the middle by a thick sheet of plexiglass. The air carried the smell of industrial cleaner and sweat. I lowered myself onto the metal stool, my bones registering every inch of the hard surface. A moment later, the door on the far side swung open. Claudette walked in. She had on an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame. Her hair, usually lacquered into a helmet of perfection, was flat and greasy. Without makeup, the lines of age and bitterness carved into her face were fully exposed. But her eyes hadn't changed. They were cold, hard, and loaded with a venomous arrogance that even a jail cell couldn't burn out. She sat down. She took in my sling. She took in my face. She did not look the least bit ashamed. She looked furious. "You look awful, Reginald," she said, her voice thin and metallic through the speaker. "I hope it hurts. It hurts less than losing a child," I answered, keeping my voice level. "You would know. You threw yours to the wolves to save your own skin." She scoffed. She leaned toward the glass, her breath fogging it. "You think you've won, don't you? You think because you have a little money and some dirty connections, you can tear us apart. You are a fool. This is a misunderstanding. Roland is on the phone right now. We have friends in Washington. We have allies in the State House. By tomorrow morning, we'll be out on bail, and you'll be staring down a malicious prosecution lawsuit that will wipe you out." She genuinely believed it. She lived inside a bubble of privilege so thick she couldn't see the walls closing around her. She was convinced that the rules were simply not written for people carrying her name. "There is no bail, Claudette," I said. The judge denied it. "Flight risk. You were caught with forged passports and $10,000 in cash. You are not going home." She laughed a sharp, jagged sound. "A technicality. Our attorneys will dismantle it. You have nothing on us." Reginald Garrett went off the deep end. "That is a tragedy, yes, but it has nothing to do with us. We were victims of a disturbed son. We tried to get him help. That is why we sent Nadine to rehab. We are the victims here. You are just a thug who got lucky." I looked at her. I marveled at the absolute moral void at her center. She was ready to bury her own son to protect her standing. She was ready to rewrite history from inside a cage. "You really don't understand what this is, do you?" I asked quietly. "You think this is about Garrett. You think this is about the kidnapping. It is about whatever fabricated charges you've manufactured against us," she snapped. I reached into my bag with my good hand and pulled out a thick red folder. Darnell had assembled it overnight, working alongside a team of forensic accountants and investigators who owed me favors. It was heavy. It landed on the metal ledge with a solid thud. I opened it and pressed the first page flat against the glass. "Do you recognize this Claudette?" I asked. She squinted at it. It was a bank transfer record, a wire transfer from a construction firm to a shell company registered in her name, dated 15 years ago. "I don't know what that is," she said, brushing it aside. "It is a bribe, Claudette," I said. $50,000 paid to your husband when he sat on the bench to bury a negligence lawsuit against a developer who used substandard concrete. That building came down 2 years later. 3 people died. Roland bought a boat the following week. She went slightly pale but kept her chin raised. "You cannot prove that." I turned the page. "Here is another one," I said. And another. 20 years of bribes, Claudette. 20 years of selling justice to whoever could afford it. Roland didn't build his wealth through investments. He built it by keeping criminals out of prison and putting innocent people inside. We have the ledgers. We have the emails. We have sworn statements from the bagman who delivered the cash in person. Her hands had started to shake. She pressed them together to hide it. "That is Roland's business," she whispered. "I knew nothing about any of it. I am just a wife." I moved to the next section. It was marked, "The Foundation." "And this is your business," I said. "The Foundation for Family Recovery, a beautiful charity. You raised millions over the past decade, but look at where the money actually went, Claudette." I pressed a spreadsheet hard against the glass. 80% of donations went to administrative costs. I read aloud. "Consulting fees paid to companies you owned. Catering contracts awarded to shell companies you controlled. You laundered money through sick people, Claudette. You took funds earmarked for addicts and spent them on jewelry and kitchen renovations. That is wire fraud. That is embezzlement. That is tax evasion. And the IRS has taken a very keen interest in this file." Her face drained of color. The arrogance began to fracture, and underneath it was a frightened old woman. "Yeah, we needed the money," she stammered. "The lifestyle, it is expensive. We had to keep up appearances. You don't know the pressure." "I understand greed," I said, closing the folder. "And I understand that you are going to federal prison. Not for a month, not for a year, for the rest of your life. You are 60 years old, Claudette. With the charges stacking up, racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, accessory to murder, you will die in a cell. You will never wear silk again. You will never drink champagne again. You will die alone in a concrete box wearing orange." She shoved back from her chair, the legs scraping violently across the floor. "No!" she screamed, slamming both palms against the glass. "You cannot do this. We are the Wyndhams. We are pillars of this community. You are termites, I said, rising slowly, wincing as my shoulder flared. You bored through everything decent until the whole structure came down. I looked at her. Tears were running freely down her face, now black streaks of cheap mascara cutting lines through her cheeks. She stared at the folder. Then she stared at me. She understood there was no exit. She understood her contacts in Washington wouldn't go near her now. She had become radioactive. Reginald, please, she begged, her voice splintering. Please, I will give you anything. I will sign whatever you put in front of me. Just keep that away from the prosecutor. We can work something out. I picked up the folder. I don't want your money, Claudette, I said. I already have it. I don't want your house. I already own it. There is no deal here. This is the bill coming due. I turned my back on her. Reginald, wait! She shrieked, beating against the glass. Wait! I am a grandmother. Think of Eli. I stopped. I turned my head just slightly. I am thinking of Eli, I said. That is precisely why I am making certain he never has to see you again. I walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard her screaming my name. I heard her cursing. I heard her sobbing. It sounded like music. It sounded like justice. I moved down the long gray corridor past the guards, past the other visitors. My shoulder burned with every step, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The empire was dead. The queen had been stripped of her throne. All that remained now was to protect what was left of my family and build something worth having from the wreckage. I walked out into the sunlight, ready for the final act. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. I sat in the front row, directly behind my daughter, my arm still in a sling, the bullet wound pressing a dull rhythm against my ribs. The pain kept me grounded. It reminded me this was no television drama. This was a street fight conducted with motions and objections instead of fists and bricks. Garrett Wyndham sat at the defense table. He looked diminished. The arrogance that used to pour off him like heat rising from summer asphalt had vanished, replaced by the twitchy, hollow-eyed desperation of a man crashing hard in a county lockup. His suit was 2 sizes too large. He'd shed 20 pounds in detention. But the sneer was still there. That sneer that said he believed his last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card. His attorney was a man named Aldous, a shark, in a $3,000 pinstripe suit, who had built a career rescuing rich boys from their own wreckage. Aldous was currently pacing before the jury box, painting a portrait of my daughter that made my hands tighten into fists. Ladies and gentlemen, Aldous said, his voice as smooth as poured oil. We are here today to decide the future of a 5-year-old boy. The prosecution would have you believe that Garrett Wyndham is a monster. But let us look at the facts. Who is the one with a documented history of mental instability? Who is the one who was admitted to a rehabilitation facility for severe opioid addiction just 2 weeks ago? Who is the one with no job, no home, and no assets? He leveled a manicured finger at Nadine. It is Nadine Dupré, he declared. A woman standing at the edge. A woman who conjured a hit-and-run accident to cover her own drug use. A woman who allowed her violent father to remove her from a medical facility by force. Is this truly who we want raising a child? Nadine sat in the witness stand. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back. She looked pale, but her spine was iron. She didn't look at Garrett. She looked at the jury. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch at a single word. Pretend you are dead, I had told her in the truck. Pretend they can't hurt you anymore because they are already ghosts. Pretend I am a ghost, Nadine thought. Your Honor. Aldous continued pivoting toward the bench. We move for full custody to remain with the Wyndham estate pending the outcome of the criminal trial. The mother is plainly unfit. She is delusional. She accuses her husband of murder on no evidence beyond the claims of a recovering addict. I glanced at Darnell Royce, my lawyer seated beside the prosecutor. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was time. The prosecutor rose. "We call Nadine Dupree to the stand for cross-examination," he said. Nadine stood. She walked to the microphone. The room went still. "Ms. Dupree," the prosecutor asked. "Mr. Aldis claims your allegations about the hit-and-run on Route 9 are hallucinations produced by drug use. He claims there is no evidence. Is that true?" Nadine looked at Aldis. Then she looked at Garrett. "No," she said clearly. Her voice did not shake. "Do you have evidence?" the prosecutor asked. "I do," Nadine said. She reached into her pocket and drew out a small black smartphone. It was not her current phone. It was an older model she had stopped using years ago. Or so Garrett believed. "My father gave me this phone 5 years ago," she told the jury. "He installed a panic app on it. It records audio in the background when triggered and uploads directly to a cloud server my father controls. I triggered it the night of the gala. I triggered it when Garrett started driving too fast." Garrett's face went white. He lurched halfway to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "That is illegal," he shouted. "She cannot use that." "Sit down, Mr. Wyndham." The judge's gavel came down hard. Nadine tapped the screen. She held the phone up to the microphone. The audio that flooded the courtroom was grainy but unmistakable, a high-performance engine screaming. Then Garrett's voice, slurred and ugly. "You are useless, Nadine. You are just like your father." Then a scream, a sickening thud, the sound of shattering glass. "Oh, God." "Garrett, stop." Nadine's voice on the recording. "You hit her. You hit her." "Shut up," the recording, Garrett's voice. Then the sound of the car accelerating, the sound of a call being placed. "Dad, it's me. I messed up. I hit someone. No, I can't stop. I'm drunk. Dad, you have to help me." The jury was frozen. The stenographer had stopped typing. Then came the second clip. Quieter. The acoustics of an interior room. "Listen to me, you stupid girl." Claudette Wyndham's voice, cold and imperious. "Garrett has a future. You do not. You are going to tell the police you were driving. You are going to say you swerved to avoid a deer. If you don't, we will take Eli. We will bury you, Nadine. We will make you look so crazy that no one will ever believe a word you say. Do you understand me? You are a nobody. We own this town." Nadine stopped the playback. The silence that followed pressed down on the room like a physical weight. It was the sound of an entire narrative collapsing. Aldis, the defense attorney, looked as if he'd taken a fist to the jaw. He shuffled his papers, hunting for a technicality, searching for an exit, but he knew it was finished. The jury was no longer seeing Nadine as an addict. They were seeing Garrett as a killer. Garrett had his head in his hands, trembling. He wasn't crying for the girl he'd killed. He was crying for himself. The prosecutor let the silence stretch a long moment. "No further questions, Your Honor." Nadine stepped down. She walked back to her seat, passing Garrett on the way. He didn't look up. But we weren't finished yet. The criminal case was sealed, but the custody fight and the civil suit for damages were still live. Aldis wasn't ready to surrender entirely. He rose, smoothing his jacket, trying to reclaim some footing for his client. "Your Honor," Aldis said, his voice strained thin. "While the recording is deeply troubling, it does not alter the financial reality. Miss Dupree has no home. She has no income. She has been living in a hotel funded by her father. The Wyndham estate, despite its current legal difficulties, represents a stable environment. It is Eli's home. It is a historic property that has been in the family for generations. Their argument was simple. Eli belonged in the house he'd grown up in, watched over by court-appointed guardians, until his mother could demonstrate she could stand on her own 2 feet financially. It was a calculated move. Aldous was banking on a judge's reluctance to place a child with a woman who couldn't show assets on paper. I got to my feet. Darnell reached for my arm. I pulled free. This wasn't a moment for legal strategy. This was a moment for fatherhood. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice filled that room like a thunderclap. "I'd like to bring the matter of the Wyndham estate before this court." The judge lifted his gaze from his papers and peered at me over his glasses. "Mr. Dupree, you have no standing in this particular motion." "I have the deed, Your Honor," I replied. Aldous let out a laugh, short, sharp, rattled. "That's absurd. That estate carries a $5 million valuation. It's protected by a trust." "It was protected by a trust," I said, closing the distance to the bench, "right up until that trust stopped making mortgage payments 3 months ago. The bank moved to foreclose last week." I reached into my jacket and drew out a thick sheaf of papers, blue-backed, bearing the county seal. "Yesterday morning I acquired the debt. I paid $4.5 million in cash directly to the bank. Foreclosure completed at 9 a.m. I crossed to the defense table and set the deed down flat in front of Garrett. "The Wyndhams no longer own that property," I said. "I do." Garrett's gaze dropped to the document. He scanned the legal description. He found my name on the buyer line. The color drained from his face. You bought my house," he breathed. I leaned down until we were eye level. "I didn't buy your house, Garrett. I bought my daughter's house." I straightened and addressed the bench. "Your Honor, a quit-claim deed has already been executed and recorded. Full title to the property at 94 Ridgemore Court has been transferred to Nadine Dupree. She isn't out on the street. She holds title to the very mansion this man has been treating as his own." I turned toward Nadine. The shock on her face told me everything she'd had no warning this was coming. "It's yours, baby," I told her. "Every brick, every room, every blade of grass." She rose from her chair. She came to the table. She stood over the deed. Then her eyes moved to Garrett. That man had spent years making her feel like a stranger inside those walls, like someone who needed permission to exist in her own home. He'd made her ask before changing the drapes. He'd made her flinch at the thought of stepping on the expensive rugs. Now she was the one who owned the floor he was standing on. Nadine lifted the deed off the table. She looked at Aldous. "Get them out," she said. Quiet. Absolute. The words of a woman forged by everything she'd survived. "I beg your pardon," Aldous managed. "My in-laws," Nadine said. "Claudette and Roland are behind bars, yes, but their household staff is still on that property. Their wardrobe is still there. Their furniture hasn't moved. I want every last trace of them gone." She turned to Garrett. "And as for you, you're evicted. You're trespassing on my land. That's my home." Garrett choked out tears, cutting down his face. "I was raised there." "Not your home any longer," Nadine said. "It belongs to Eli now, and you have no place in it." She addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I own the home where my son has lived since the day he was born. I have no criminal history. The child's father has entered a guilty plea to murder. I am asking for immediate sole custody of Eli Wyndham, along with a permanent restraining order keeping Garrett Wyndham and his parents off my property." The judge examined the deed. He studied the rattled man sitting at the defense table. He looked at Aldous, who had nothing left to say. Then the gavel came down. Motion granted. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to Nadine Dupree. The defendant is directed to vacate the premises without delay. Court is adjourned. That crack of the gavel was the finest sound I'd heard in my life. Garrett crumpled in his chair, heaving with sobs. His freedom was gone. His son was gone. And now the last thing tethering him to any sense of identity, the name, the house, was gone too. I crossed the room to Nadine. Her eyes weren't on Garrett. They were fixed on the deed resting in her hands. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. I wrapped my good arm around her shoulders. "Let's go home," I said. "You are home." We walked out together. At our backs, officers were converging on Garrett to escort him back to his cell. He was shouting something about fairness, something about being wronged. The room had already moved on. Outside, daylight hit us clean and bright. The sky was clear. The war had more chapters left in it, a fraudulent charity still standing, a legacy that needed to be ground to dust. But the battle that had mattered most was finished. We climbed into the truck. "Where are we going, Dad?" Nadine asked. "The estate," I said, turning over the engine. "I want to watch you put new locks on those doors. And I want to be the one who helps you toss Claudette's portrait into the dumpster." A smile broke across Nadine's face, slow, real, reaching her eyes. I hadn't seen her smile like that in years. "Let's go," she said. I pointed the truck toward the hills, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't thinking like a man running a job or planning his next move. I was just a father driving his daughter home. That was the whole world. 3 days after the verdict, the true settling of accounts got underway. No courtroom, no judge, no stenographer, no gallery. It played out in the unforgiving concrete corridors of the state penitentiary, where Garrett Wyndham was being processed, like any other convict. He'd told himself he'd be insulated. A Wyndham didn't land in general population. He'd end up in some minimum security facility, alongside tax cheats and insider traders, the kind of men who jogged the perimeter track before breakfast. He was badly mistaken. The moment that guilty verdict was announced, every layer of protection he'd enjoyed dissolved instantly. The cartel creditors holding $5 million of his debt weren't moved by pending appeals or courtroom procedure. They dealt in one currency repayment. Garrett couldn't offer cash anymore, so he offered the only thing he had left. I got word through a source I'd cultivated inside the corrections system. Garrett had barely clocked 6 hours among the general population when it went down. They caught him in the shower block. No cameras, no witnesses. 3 men. No weapons needed. Their fists were the message delivered on behalf of the investors Garrett had burned. They snapped his ribs, his nose. His orbital socket gave way with a sound I'm told nobody who heard it forgot. Guards discovered him on the floor, folded into himself, not calling out for his attorney, calling out for his mother. He was transferred to the infirmary under protective custody, but none of that changed what had already been established. The news had traveled. Garrett Wyndham wasn't royalty inside those walls. He was prey, 20 years of that ahead of him. 20 years of watching every doorway tensing at every footstep, never once feeling safe. A savage existence, but one he'd constructed himself piece by piece every time he'd gambled with someone else's life as the stakes. Meanwhile, his parents were getting their own education. Roland and Claudette were staring down racketeering and fraud charges with life sentences attached. The prosecutor put one offer on the table. A single deal, whoever cooperated first would earn a recommendation for leniency. The other would grow old and die in federal custody. Roland didn't deliberate. Inside 10 minutes, he was giving up his wife of 40 years. Slumped in the interrogation room in his orange jumpsuit, he laid it all out. The charity scheme entirely Claudette's invention. The forged signatures on the checks. Her hand, not his. The money laundering. She was the architect. He was just a bewildered old man who went along because what else could he do? He cast her as a Lady Macbeth pulling strings from the dark, while he stood obliviously in the light. In the adjacent room, Claudette was spinning the identical story in reverse. Roland was controlling. She said he had coerced her into moving the money to service his gambling debts and finance his affairs. She produced ledgers she'd been sitting on for years, each page a detailed account of his payoffs and illegal property dealings. She set fire to everything he was hoping the flames would keep her warm enough to walk out sooner. The Wyndham dynasty didn't collapse dramatically. It dissolved in a pair of interrogation rooms, two people who had once shared everything, now clawing each other apart, trading away the last scraps of their dignity for the slim chance of a shorter sentence. A lifetime spent cultivating the image of a formidable, unified family. At the finish, nothing remained but two cornered animals on a vessel going under. While that wreckage settled, I turned my attention to what came next. The bank's foreclosure on the Wyndham estate had gone through. On paper, the property belonged to me, which meant in every way that counted it belonged to Nadine. Neither of us had any desire to set foot in it as a home. The place was tainted. Every room held the residue of their manipulation, the imprint of their calculated cruelties. We resolved to clear it out entirely. I brought in an auction house to take the mansion's contents off our hands. The antique furniture went. The art collection went. Crystal chandeliers, silk rugs, all of it sold. The fleet of luxury cars, including the silver sedan Garrett had used to take Eli, went to auction. We stripped that house down to nothing but walls and floors. It felt like a purification. Each piece that rolled out the door carried some of the poison with it. The sale brought in $4 million. Add the seized Wyndham bank accounts and the unwinding of their shell companies, and we were looking at nearly $10 million in total. Blood money, funds skimmed from charities, proceeds of fraud, dollars that had passed through the suffering of people who never saw a dime of it. I wanted none of it. Nadine wanted none of it. We sat in my kitchen over coffee, staring at the bank draft on the table. "What do we do with it, Dad?" Nadine asked. "We return it," I said. "Not to them, to the ones they wronged." We established the Nadine Dupree Foundation. The mission didn't require a long explanation: legal defense, financial assistance, and safe housing for women and children fleeing domestic abuse and coercive control. We wanted to be the lifeline that Nadine never had. No woman should have to stay caged with a monster simply because she can't cover a lawyer's retainer or a first month's rent. We acquired a building downtown, an old hotel I had renovated years back. We turned it into a refuge. The attorneys we brought on were ruthless in a courtroom and patient as saints with the people they served. We added therapists, security staff, a full support apparatus. A fortress built for people who had never had anyone stand in front of them before. The Wyndham name had meant power and entitlement for decades. We buried it. What rose in its place was something built on accountability and shelter. Every dollar they'd extracted through corruption was now being deployed against men cast from the same mold as Garrett. There wasn't a sweeter form of justice I could have designed. A week after the foundation opened its doors, I made one last visit I'd been putting off. I drove out to a modest brick clinic on the edge of the city, peeling sign out front, nothing glamorous about it. This was Dr. Okafor's practice. He was the private physician I'd reached out to the night I pulled Nadine out of that rehab facility. He'd arrived at the hotel suite at 2 o'clock in the morning, without hesitation, set up an IV to clear the sedatives from her blood, and kept watch over her vitals for 3 days, running on no sleep. He'd turned down every dollar I tried to hand him. told me he was just doing what the job demanded. He'd put his medical license on the line to treat a patient off the record because he recognized a father who had run out of options. He was everything Dr. Greer wasn't the opposite of the corrupt medical machinery the Wyndhams had bent to their purposes. I pushed through the door into his waiting room. It was packed, tired faces, worn-down bodies. A clinic for people without insurance, for working families squeezed to the edge. Dr. Okafor was behind the reception desk with a chart in his hands. He had the look of a man running on fumes. "Dr. Okafor," I said. He glanced up. Something softened around his eyes. "Mr. Dupree." "How is Nadine?" "She's healing," I said. "She's strong." "Glad to hear it." He set the chart down. "What brings you in?" "What can I do for you?" "You already did it," I said. "You saved her. You bought us the time we needed so her head was clear enough to testify. Without what you did that night, none of the rest of it happens." I reached into my coat and came out with an envelope. "The foundation we built." I told him, "Needs a medical director. Someone who knows that medicine is about healing people, not billing them. Someone who doesn't fold when power pushes back." I held out the envelope. Inside was a contract to salary 3 times what he was currently earning, and a $2 million grant to overhaul his clinic and subsidize care for his patients. "We want you alongside us," I said. "We want to send the families we help directly to you. We want to make sure they receive proper care no matter what they can or can't afford." Dr. Okafor opened the envelope. He read through the contract. His hands began to tremble. He looked out at the crowded waiting room, the people he strained every day to take care of. Then he looked back at me. There were tears forming. "Reginald," he said, his voice barely holding together. This changes everything." "It's just money, Doc," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It only means something if it's put to work. You came through for me when all I had was desperation. Let me return that." He took my hand and shook it. Solid grip. The grip of an honest man. "Thank you," he said quietly. I stepped out of that clinic and back into the open air. Something had shifted. That weight I'd been carrying in my chest, the one that had settled in the moment the phone rang at 3 a.m. and upended my world, it was gone. Finally and completely gone. I had torn down a kingdom built on deception. I had seen the guilty face their consequences. I had shielded the people who needed shielding, and I had squared every debt I owed. I climbed into my truck, checked the time, nearly 3 o'clock. Eli would be walking out of his new school soon, a public school where no one cared about your family name or your pedigree. I had somewhere to be. I had a grandson to pick up. I turned the key and pulled away, leaving everything behind me exactly where it belonged in the rearview mirror. The fighting was done. It was time to live again. 1 year on the view from the 40th floor of the Dupree Logistics Tower stopped you cold. The city laid out below a sprawling grid of light and steel that I had spent a lifetime helping construct. But I wasn't the one behind the desk anymore. Nadine was. I stood at the window and watched her run the board meeting. Cream-colored, tailored suit hair cut in a crisp, precise bob. Nothing about her resembled the broken woman I had carried out of that facility. She looked like someone who had always been in charge. She was walking the board through quarterly projections on the new affordable housing initiative, catching every weak number, every cut corner with a precision that put me in mind of her mother. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that doesn't need to raise itself. "We are not skimping on the insulation. I don't care what the line item says. We build homes that hold up. If the numbers don't work, find a different supplier, or I'll find a different board." The room went still. Then one by one heads dipped. Pens scratched paper. They weren't deferring to her because of whose daughter she was. They deferred because she'd earned it. She'd taken over day-to-day operations 6 months prior, and the company had hit a new gear under her. She had taken every blow from the past few years and hammered it into something harder than what came before. Eli was in the corner running a toy dump truck back and forth across the expensive carpet. He caught my eye and grinned wide a gap in his smile where a baby tooth had recently come out. "Look, Grandpa," he said under his breath, steering the truck in a wide arc. "I'm hauling concrete just like you." I smiled back at him. He didn't startle at loud sounds anymore. Didn't pull inward when adults' voices climbed. He was a happy, ordinary 6-year-old. Whatever shadow the Wyndham estate had cast over those young eyes had finally cleared. Nadine wrapped up the meeting. The executives moved out in a line, shaking her hand with real respect. She came over and pressed a kiss to my cheek. "How'd I do, Dad?" she asked, the steel in her voice gone soft for just a moment. "Stuti, you did good, baby," I said. "Better than good. You run this company better than I ever did." She looked out at the skyline. "I learned from the best," she said. "Then, Dad, thanks for handling the intake at the foundation this morning. Dr. Okafor said 3 new families came in." They did," I said. "And we're going to take care of every one of them." The Nadine Dupree Foundation had found its footing. It had grown into something women in desperate circumstances could count on legal help a roof away forward. Every dollar we channeled into it landed like a counterpunch against men like Garrett. Best use I ever made of money. I looked at my daughter and my grandson, safe, strong, free. The war was over in every sense that mattered. That evening, I was back at my house in the suburbs. Quiet. The repairs were all done, fresh paint on the walls, new furniture in the rooms, but the character of the place unchanged underneath all of it. It was a home that felt like peace. I went out to pull the mail from the box at the end of the driveway. The air had a cool edge to it, the smell of fallen leaves riding the breeze. I flipped through the stacked bills circulars, and then I stopped. A plain white envelope. Return address stamped in red. Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. The name above it was handwritten, shaky and small. Inmate 89402, Claudette Wyndham. I stood there holding it. No anger rose up. No dread. I felt nothing at all the way you feel holding something from a world that no longer has any claim on you. I turned around and walked back inside. I never opened it. I already knew what was inside. A plea, a manipulation, some carefully constructed tale about how hard the days were, about declining health, about needing money for the commissary or a fresh attorney. She'd reach for my sense of mercy. She'd try to work guilt like a lever. She'd invoke Eli's name. But Claudette Wyndham had exhausted every bit of goodwill she'd ever had with me. She had nothing left to spend. I crossed to the fireplace in the living room where the remnants of last night's fire still pulsed faintly beneath a layer of ash. I struck a match and touched the flame to the corner of that envelope. The paper caught, curled, went dark at the edges. The red prison stamp dissolved into a curl of smoke. I held it until the heat reached my fingers, then laid it on the grate, and watched it reduce itself to nothing but pale gray ash. She wasn't owed a reply. She wasn't owed a single moment of my attention. Her punishment wasn't only the cell they'd put her in. It was this, the silence. It was knowing that the world had kept turning without her. That the people she'd worked so hard to grind down were flourishing while she faded. That was the real sentence. That was justice with teeth. I brushed the soot from my hands and headed to the kitchen. Coffee was what the moment called for. I poured myself a cup black and carried it out to the back porch. I settled into my rocking chair, the old wood groaning its familiar greeting beneath me. The sun was sinking behind the tree line, throwing long shadows across the lawn I'd kept up for 30 years. I took a slow sip. Hot, bitter, exactly how I want it. My mind drifted back across it, all the gate, the jail cell, the auction, the warehouse. Each one felt like it belonged to another man's life, and yet the evidence was still written in my body. My shoulders still ached when rain was coming, but I didn't mind those aches. They were proof that I hadn't backed down, that I'd absorbed everything they threw at me and stayed on my feet. People recognized me now when I was out at the grocery store around the neighborhood. A few would whisper, a few would point. The man who brought down the Wyndhams, the contractor who walked into a bank and bought the debt. But most of them just saw what was sitting right in front of them, an older black man in a flannel shirt on his porch with a cup of coffee. That suited me fine. I had no need for anyone to grasp the full picture, the accounts, the properties, the reach I'd built. I knew. Nadine knew. And the Wyndhams knew which was the only audience that had ever mattered. I had delivered a lesson I wanted, echoing through their country clubs for the next generation. Don't misjudge a father. Don't take a quiet man for a weak one. Don't read humility as poverty. And above all else, never put your hands on his family. I glanced over at the house next door. A young couple was hauling boxes and setting down roots. They spotted me and raised a hand. I raised one back. To them, I was just Reginald, a neighbor, a grandfather. But if trouble ever found its way back to my door, if anyone decided to test what was left of me, they'd discover quickly enough that the old contractor hadn't gone soft. There was still plenty of fight in these bones. I took another sip and let my eyes drift upward as the stars began to appear one by one. Everything was as it should be. My daughter was a queen. That is where I will leave the story today. Right here in the quiet of a back porch and a cup of coffee watching the stars come out over a lawn I have tended for 30 years. This road cost me. It cost me sleep. It cost me blood. It cost me the comfortable smallness of a life where nobody noticed me. But I believe God placed the right people in my path at the right moments. Dr. Okafor at 2 in the morning. Darnell in that courtroom, Nadine finding her voice when she needed it most. None of that was coincidence. You fight as hard as you can, and then something larger than you carries the rest. If this family revenge story taught me anything worth passing on, it is this. Never let someone mistake your silence for weakness. Quiet men can move mountains when the moment demands it. Document everything. The truth has no power sitting in your memory. Write it down, record it, protect it. If you are a parent or a grandpa figure to someone who is suffering, show up. Not with advice, with presence, with action. And when justice finally lands, do not spend it on yourself. Turn it into something that protects the next person who has no one standing in their corner. If these grandpa stories speak to something real in your life, leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stand up and fight back. And if you have not already, please subscribe to Calm Family Revenge. These stories are here every week, and I am glad to tell them. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Until next time, take care of the people who need you.